welcome to a special presentation of the Hard Rock Show. I'm Andrew.
I'm Mick.
I'm Dave.
We're here tonight to do a special tribute, or no, it's not a tribute, a battle episode. Our monthly special this month is a battle episode. But before we get stuck into that, details are on the screen. Make sure you are subscribing and following us wherever you can. If you're just listening to us, then also follow all of our social media channels as well, because that's how you see everything that gets done by us, and also it's how you get involved with audience polling, which is a part of tonight's episode. If you'd be so kind, then please also check out our Patreon page. Any support you can give us via that platform would be fantastic. And speaking of those that support us, a very, very special thank you to our wonderful sponsors in Squidding, Screen Printing, Alt Cult, and Rockstar Finance. So as prefaced, tonight is a battle episode. It was Mick's idea, so we'll go to him very shortly. But long story short, it is a Bruce Dickinson versus Rob Halford when it comes to their solo or side projects outside of things like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. We'll all go through a bit of an opening statement and then we'll get stuck into the rounds. But Mick, over to you. This is your idea, so what made you come up with this one?
Generally, when you've got iconic bands, and let's face it, Iron Maiden and Judas Priest are probably two of the biggest, alongside Metallica maybe, probably the most three biggest bands in the world have been for the longest time and probably always will be.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed, over my journey...
Well, dogs lose their mind. Hold on, man. Hey, stop.
You put me off.
You don't know your bark. The dog next door has gone off his head, so it says Caesar goes off, and then what happens is Caesar barks, which sets Nala off, and Nala forgets why she's barking, which sets Caesar off again. Stop.
All right. Where was I?
Where you left off. Continue.
Just talking to general music people and metalheads in general and stuff, and a lot of fanatical people would not really know or not follow the artist if they left the band or if they did something else. And I was one of those guys that I kind of had to have everything. And so I followed Bruce as well as Maiden, for example. And then I got into Halford stuff because I really liked Fight and whatever else. And I've just noticed that a lot of people don't, probably not a lot, but there's a good portion of, big Judas Priest fans that maybe didn't listen to Halford's solo stuff or never came across it. So I thought we should visit some of this stuff because, the hardcore people would know it. But generally the lesser fans possibly may have never come across it, and they're probably missing out on a gold mine's worth of material there, over a good decade's worth of material from both artists. So... And I thought, well, it still keeps within the realm of what we do, but it's something a little bit different. And it'd be good to see what everyone's opinions are tonight, and generally through the polling and the audiences that sort of got involved. And I think a lot of this stuff is overlooked because of their bands that they come from are so big and iconic that I don't think a lot of people look into some of the solo stuff that was really not that long ago. So. That's the reasoning behind it anyway.
Yeah. That's cool. I'll put my hand up in a second. But Dave, what about you? What are your opening sort of thoughts on this one when you were asked to do this one with us? This
was actually a really interesting one for me because I'm as guilty as Mick's been talking about because I've overlooked all of this. I've been a Priest and Maiden fan for a very long time, and I remember when both left their band to pursue their solo career. And with the exception of the Resurrection album from Halford, I hadn't heard anything else that he'd done since leaving Priest and returning to Priest because he still did stuff after that. And that was only a couple of years ago that I actually listened to that. Bruce Dickinson, I heard the video. I saw the video for Tattooed Millionaire when it was first released, and that was the extent of what I've heard. So it was really good to be forced to listen to these albums because, there is quite a bit of interesting stuff here. So I'm glad I got the chance to do that.
Cool. Well, all up, we've got just under 11 hours worth of music here. So there's 6 rounds, an album from each. So you've got Tattooed Millionaire going up against War of Words. Then it's Balls to Picasso going up against Small Deadly Space. Skunkworks versus Voyeurs. Accident of Earth versus Resurrection. The Chemical Wedding versus Crucible. And Tyranny of Souls versus Made of Metal. I know that that's not all going to be, completely in sync timeline-wise and stuff like that, but it is the best way to sort of match things up and also avoiding the Christmas songs, one that Halford did a few years ago,
Yeah.
because we have covered that and it didn't go well that time around. And
Well, we can't do that one anyway because Bruce hasn't done a Christmas album as far
no,
as
it doesn't fit.
No.
So when I found the two Voyeurs album, that was okay. That's replacing that for me. But then we've also done in the past the Chemical Wedding. I think last year as part of our.
I think we've touched on Accident of Birth and Chemical Wedding in the past.
Yeah, at some point or another, yeah. So, but outside of that, outside of what we've done here, especially in the Halford Christmas songs, I haven't really checked out any of these albums. I've known of their existence, and it's always on that, to-do list that we all have that's, longer than Santa's list. But it's the one of those ones where, okay, when Mick come up with the idea, it's like, you know what, this is actually pretty fucking cool, and it'll be interesting to do this one, because the Priest versus Maiden battle episode was really interesting in how that played out, and so it'll be really interesting to see how this one goes. And we did an audience poll, and we've got those results here, which will, once we get through each round, we'll announce the audience poll of each round and then our results, and at the end we'll tally it all up and we'll say the ultimate thing is who wins, and it's just a round by round thing. So there's 6 rounds, and we'll just get stuck into it. It's a bit of fun. But no, I was looking forward to this one, and it's a lot there, but I wasn't sure what to expect, and I think we'll get to close this out later on, but I think ultimately I was happier than I was originally anticipating I would be. But without any further ado, let's get stuck into the first one. So for round 1, Bruce Dickinson with Tattooed Millionaire, 10 tracks for 43 minutes, the first solo album from the Iron Maiden frontman, released May 1990 by EMI and Columbia, produced by Chris Sangarides. This album saw the beginning of the collaboration between Bruce and Yannick Gers, which would continue into Iron Maiden later on. So over to you, Mick. You first.
Yeah, it's funny how when you go back and listen to albums, you think of when you first heard them. And I remember being a very young person at that point in time and being very pissed off that this didn't sound like Iron Maiden. It sounded a lot different, and it was a lot softer, and I hated it. But as the years have gone on, I've really come to appreciate, and I've said this in the past, that if you're going to go and solo, if you're going to do a solo album, it needs to be different from the band, which is where my mental side back then was not there. It's like, this doesn't sound like metal. This doesn't sound, like I was freaking out. Like all the young dudes. I mean, obviously, that was I think
the Hoople cover
single, and I thought that was catchy. I didn't actually know it was a cover. I think it is a cover, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not his song.
Not the Hoople, yeah.
And at the time, I didn't know, and I thought, well, that's kind of the melodic guitars and stuff, and so I went and got the album, and it threw me because it started off with acoustic at the start, Son of a Gun, which is one of my all-time favorite Bruce Dickinson songs.
Okay.
But when I think about when I first heard it, I've gone, what the fuck is this? And what is going on here, So I guess I've kind of matured as a listener. I've kind of come to appreciate things a lot more than when I was fucking 13 or whatever it was when I heard it. I think it's a good starting point for us. I guess at that point in time, you're still in Iron Maiden. I had no idea he possibly was thinking of maybe leaving, and he might have been thinking about it at the time of doing this album. It might have been crossing on his radar. I know he stayed another couple of years, but it may have been toying with his mind at one point that you might want to try and do his own thing. And obviously, this album is pretty good. It's not crazy good or anything like that. It's solid for my mind. What makes it great is Bruce Dickinson's a great singer. So anything that he puts his voice to, generally, if it's not as strong musically, somehow he makes it with some great hooks, and there's really big vocal hooks on this, that maybe sometimes are even bigger than any Maiden album to that date, to that point in time. There's some really big hooks, some big sing-along choruses where I thought, in a live format, that would probably really work, really well. And let's face it, everything Iron Maiden does, 90% of it, the crowd's singing along anyway. So I think it hasn't aged well, this album, but if you're a fan of Bruce Dickinson, it still has its place. Yeah. So I gave it a 7 out of 10. Cool. The standouts for me are Son of a Gun and Tattooed Millionaire. I do enjoy it as an album, but for me, it's just like, I don't know if you'd found his feet, and it was just like, it found a little disjointed throughout the album. There was no clear direction where it was going, like if it was going to be a full-on melodic rock album, or it has, a couple of little Fear of the Dark-esque,
it was eclectic
hindsight songs, and riffing patterns and stuff like that, which maybe that's what Yannick Gers brought to the next Maiden album after joining in hindsight. But yeah, no, for me, it was just like, I enjoy it more now than I did back in the day.
Yeah.
So
cool. Dave?
As what's been covered already, it's very different to Iron Maiden. And because I'm so used to hearing Bruce's vocals over the Maiden sound, can be hard to listen to at times. It took a little bit of time to adjust, and then once you get into the idea that this is more rock than metal, he is trying something new for a solo album, so you have to be in that mindset to fully appreciate this album. Overall, the album's got a very laid-back, no expectations feel. It's just like he's got some mates together and decided to give something different a go. But once again, you're kind of waiting for him to really hit those high notes that he does in Maiden. You want him to do what he can do with his voice. Yeah. And it never comes. So overall, it's just, it's kind of like he's phoning it in. I don't want to say anything bad, but, he's got his day job and does everything to the full extent there. And this is just having some beers with some mates and having some fun.
Bit more within himself.
Yeah. Just, like I said, no expectations, laid back fun. It's an enjoyable listen, but not something I go to very regularly. I gave it 6 out of 10. Sounds were Hell on Wheels, Gypsy Road, and Licking the Gun.
Cool. Well, what I found first off listening to this one was the lyrics. I think Bruce Dickinson is underrated as a lyricist, and I think that this sort of side project work from him starts off on a good front in that regard here. With his vocals and his lyrics, you're usually in for a good show. And it's funny how it's been noted, like the Yannick Gers thing, you can hear what was coming later on from Iron Maiden in little bits and pieces, that melodic input and all this stuff that does come later on from Maiden. You can hear that starting here, which is pretty cool. And it's good in this context because this is as far away from Iron Maiden as you're going to get, just about. There's a big commercial side to this. There are hooks on it. I know that it wasn't anything to be taken way too seriously because he was still in Iron Maiden at the time and he was exploring and doing all different stuff. But this is diverse, which in the greater scheme of things is a bit of a refreshing listen today. It shows that Bruce, while he was doing within himself a bit, he wasn't doing the hype. Like, you're not getting any of the iconic Maiden screams out of this one here, but because this is more rock and less metal. But it's a good showcase of his vocal in a different way. I still think it sounds good 30 years on. It is time-stamped from the era, but it's overall held up pretty well. The performances are solid. And it actually felt like a band to me, which is cool. It didn't feel like, that cobbled together, someone's got an ego, wants to get some stuff out. It didn't feel like that. It felt like a band playing, which is awesome. The cover of All the Young Dudes was an interesting choice. I mean, Bowie wrote it, Mott the Hoople did it, and on this album, it stuck out a bit too much for me. It's well done, but it didn't sell me when it was in the middle of the album like that. And not every song on here is a ripper, but at the same time, there isn't anything I'd consider a dud. So it's that sort of finding your feet kind of a phase in a lot of respects as well. But even that, taken into account, as far as first-time solo efforts go from someone who's been doing something for so long with something else, this is pretty bloody good overall. It's a feel-good album when you listen to it. It's a bit from the era, but you're able to appreciate that. If you're able to appreciate sort of the 80s to the 90s, you'll get something out of this. If you don't appreciate the era of music, then this is not going to change your mind now. It sits right into that bracket. I think it's a pretty good start for this whole battle thing. It's different. It's nothing epic, but it's a good, solid album. I gave it 7 out of 10, and I picked Tattooed Millionaire, Zulu Lulu, which is fucking cool, and Gypsy Road. So I think across we've got a few different choices in there, which is interesting. So now we go to the counter punch. Now it's time for, funny I say that when we say the word band, fight. So fight with War of Words 12 tracks for 50 minutes, the debut album from American band, released September 1993 via Epic, produced by Addy Bohr and Rob Halford. This is the first release from Rob Halford since his departure from Judas Priest, and saw him bring drummer Scott Travis across with him for this one as well. And we'll throw it to you, Dave, to kick off proceedings on this.
Okay. We all make mistakes in life, and when Halford left Priest, I was very pissed off. And I was like, yep, fuck you, I'm not listening to you anymore. What you do as a teenager, which was ridiculously stupid because this album is amazing. It doesn't sound like Judas Priest, but it's still very much a metal album. And it gets you right from the opening track and does not let go. I think he was partly motivated to outdo his old band. It sounds like they're on a mission. He's got a solid band together, and he wants to just prove that he can do something on his own.
Yeah.
These guys can really play. Just about every song is amazing, and Halford sounds great throughout. And of course, Statue from Steel Panther.
Yeah.
So that was cool. That when you hear him in a more serious setting, and even he's a damn good guitar player. But yeah, this album is amazing. I gave it 9 out of 10.
Wow.
So Into the Pit, Life in Black, Immortal Sin, War of Words, Little Crazy and Contortion.
Wow. Okay. You really enjoyed this one.
Loved it.
Cool. Mick.
Yeah, see, for me, I wasn't a big Priest fan back then. So it didn't wash over me that I knew of him being in Priest and all that, but I didn't have anyone growing up that was a big Priest fan. So I wasn't introduced to that till well later in my life. So Fight, I heard as a brand new band, but I had no backlog to Judas Priest, really. So I fucking loved this album.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, I remember going to JB Hi-Fi on a Saturday, and that was what we did back in the day. Every 2 or 3 weeks, you'd save up $20-$30 and you'd go into the only JB Hi-Fi that we had at the time, which was Elizabeth Street, and then you'd find something, you'd come home hopefully with 2 or 3 CDs or maybe 1, so depending on the price. But I heard this through a good friend of mine, and I went out and said, that's it, next week I'm going to go and get this. I fucking loved it. But what I do think, even back then, and it still stayed with me all these years, is that it was modelled off the Black Album, Metallica's Black Album.
Okay.
I find the sound and production almost flawless to the Black Album. If anything, it's slightly better than the Black Album, because that was a precedent album, if you ask me. But in terms of guitar tones and drum sounds and Jesus Christ, it's very close to the Black Album. And I think that was intentionally done because of how big that album was and what it did. And if he was going to leave his band, he wanted to
go out swinging. Set
a precedent or follow something that's been big to make himself still relevant. I've always thought that. I thought the songs aren't like the Black Album, but the sound is very much like the Black Album in my eyes. So, but having said that, the songs are not a representation of Metallica. They're very strong. They're very simple. They're not technical by any means, whereas you thought he might have wanted to go more technical, because that's where Judas Priest was sort of heading, after Painkiller and all that kind of stuff. Their technicality was really raising the bar. But he sort of stripped it back to make really, really good songs. And I thought he used some of his usual technique. Now I've learned what Judas Priest is all about. And I also thought that he was trying different things with his vocal that he hadn't done or wasn't able to do in Priest. So I thought this was a big growth album for him. I think it's a fantastic album. I gave it a 9 out of 10 also. Nailed to the Gun, Immortal Sin, Reality, A New Beginning, but really and that's just being nitpicky, but I love it from top to bottom. I think it's fucking great. And it's probably overlooked these days, like a lot of people, if they're looking for 90s metal and stuff from an established artist, they need to go back to this album because it's fucking good. Cool.
Well, I get the modelling after the Black Album, but I'll still say the Black Album is better produced than this one. But I hold Black Album pretty fucking high. So that's a hard one to knock off the peg for me personally. But that also comes down to taste. But when you get into this album, this is not Judas Priest, and that's a good thing in my eyes. This is more straight ahead. It's got that sort of groove metal feel to it. Pantera kind of stuck in there a little bit, not just Metallica. It's very dark in sound as well. It's grittier. It's got a more organic sort of sound in the production. Not a huge amount of polish, but it's very well balanced. But I like the tones. Like you're talking about the guitar tones, they were really good on this, and you expect that with Satchel when you know about the pedigree there too. But also how Rob's voice played in the space allocated on this one. Nothing entirely different overall, but the presentation and the attitude was really engaging on this. Chugging riffs, driving rhythms, pounding bass, all give that platform for Halford to just launch. And he uses different parts of his voice that you haven't heard for a while from the Priest stuff in this album, which is also a really good switch. He didn't want this just to be another Priest knockoff kind of a thing. I thought the swing and the groove was really good on this. It's not a frantic heavy listen, but it's that swing and the heaviness in the tones that really drives it. And I thought there was some nice layering, just enough, sort of lighter touches to bring, to counterbalance the darkness on this. And there were some pretty solid hooks in the writing too, which was surprising. I didn't expect that from a Halford release. There were little spoken moments on this, which were a nice touch, and the lyrics are pretty different to Priest as well. It's a little more sort of real world, whereas Priest had that sort of different sort of not in the real world kind of element to a lot of their stuff. And I thought there was little different flavours that were nicely done. There was a little Middle Eastern vibe on Laid to Rest, which demonstrated more diversity than I was expecting as well, and it does help the album to flow. Not really a lot of blistering solos, but the ones that are there serve the songs really well. And a lot of people in the comments raved, on the audience poll, which I'll get to in a second, they raved at the live show when this band came out. So you can tell, listening to this, that the live show would have been a lot of fun in a very intense kind of show too. This was a really pleasant surprise, and it's one that grows on you too. The more time you spend with it, the more you're going to like it. I haven't got tired of this one, and I've listened to it quite a few times. I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. I picked Immortal Sin, Little Crazy, and A New Beginning. So that's a unanimous one from all of us. We've all picked War of Words to beat out Tattooed Millionaire, which also, for that matter, ties into the audience choice as well, because the audience chose this album in the polling too. So everyone's in agreement after round one. We'll see how long this lasts for.
Everyone's smart.
Okay.
After this year that we're having, fuck me. So.
Yep. When you dropped your mic, it might have changed your level a little bit. You're a little bit quieter than you were before, Mick, just so you got a heads up on that one.
Tried it, because it looks like I've got a black penis here. I put it down. Is that better for you? Or
maybe move it a bit closer to you. I think it's going to have to be a bit closer to you, if you can. Don't know what happened there,
I
but
haven't touched any levels.
Is it turned? Is it facing a different direction?
No. It's back to where it was.
Okay.
So.
Well, it'll work itself out. This thing has automatic.
Testing. Hello.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I can hear you. It's just you're a bit quieter, but it'll balance out anyway. So won't get hung up on it. We'll move on to the next one.
Edit that part out, please. Edit. So.
You know me. I probably won't do that.
No, it'll be fucking straight up when it gets released. So.
It'll be fun. It's always the better. The dogs are staying in, so everything's going to stay in. All right. So on to round two. Let's go to Bruce Dickinson with Balls to Picasso. 10 tracks for 51 minutes. The second solo studio album from Bruce that was his first after leaving Iron Maiden. This was released in June 1994 via Mercury and Sanctuary, produced by Shay Baby. And that is a real person, by the way. This album marks the first time that Bruce would team up with Roy Z, who also brought his band Tribe of Gypsies onto this album after this album had a couple of false starts. It was started, then stopped, then started, then stopped, and on the third go around, it finally kicked off with the personnel that I've just listed there. So, Mick, over to you.
Yeah, I didn't hear this initially straight away. I was kind of like Dave when Bruce left Iron Maiden. I was really pissed, and I didn't really go and follow what he was doing afterwards. So I didn't get to this album until probably 2 or 3 years after it came out. I find this one hasn't aged well. I don't really hear a lot of enthusiasm on this album. It kind of drags its feet. If he was trying to follow the same pattern as Tattooed Millionaire, I think the only thing I can get out of this album is it's more cohesive, so it's not as diverse as what you were saying on Tattooed Millionaire. So it is more of a collection of songs that kind of work with each other. But having said that, there's two fantastic songs, and they're my favourites, which is Laughing in the Hiding Bush and Tears of a Dragon.
Nice.
I think they're fantastic songs. In fact, Tears of a Dragon probably should have been an Iron Maiden song, unfortunately.
I'll agree with that,
But overall, as an album, I find it's and has nothing to do with the pace or anything, because all those bands were slowing down. If you remember, in the first part of the 90s, everyone slowed down. You know, it was just that was what was going on, because thrash or melodic metal, as you called it then, was dying, and everyone was trying to do something different to stay relevant. So whether it would be Megadeth or Metallica, it doesn't really matter. Everyone was slowing down. I just don't think it's a very strong album overall. It has a couple of moments here and there. Production sounds a bit light on for me, but I have the same problem with that with Fear of the Dark too. It doesn't suit some artists to go for a rock production. You kind of needed that thick, slick, layered, and Bruce needs that sound behind him. So I gave it what did I give it? I gave it a 6.5 out of 10. Because I'm still a massive fan of Bruce. So he'll never drop too far off the tree. But in terms of output, this wouldn't have helped him at all, especially leaving Iron Maiden. This wasn't the album he should have done. He needed to come out with a balls to the wall tearing metal album to get people talking again, because I reckon he fell off the cliff between 94 and 98. There was nothing going on Bruce Dickinson related that I can remember. There's probably good reason, because if you're going to put out stuff like this, you're not fucking helping yourself going solo. So, that's where it was at for me. You know, don't hate it, don't love it. Still don't really go to it to this day.
Cool. All right. Dave?
First listen, first impression was this is a bit better than the previous album. And I was enjoying it until track 7 came on, Shoot All the Clowns, and this rap shit happened. And I lose the point for that. Rap had no business on a Bruce Dickinson album. It was fucking horrible. So, but apart from that, this is a bit of a step up from the previous album. It's got some various moods, and it's dark and menacing, and then it's laid back a little bit. Its vocals are good, but we still don't get the screams that we're used to with these old band at this point. Once again, the band has a loose feel, and it's very odd hearing these vocals over this type of music. Like I said, it's all right. It loses a point because of the rap, but here's the controversial thing. As far as songwriting and music goes, I prefer the X Factor from Iron Maiden over this.
Wow.
I think there's better songs. Forget about the vocals, but there's better songs.
Yeah, I definitely stylistically, this album didn't suit Bruce.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
So it was going to get a 7, but it gets a 6 because of the rap stuff. So 6 out of 10. Stands to Cyclops, Change of Heart, Laughing in the Hiding Bush, and Tears of the Dragon. Those two are pretty good songs.
Okay. Well, I think Tears of the Dragon is a universally well-liked song here. That's one of my favourites as well. Straight off, for me, this one felt a bit sort of leaner and meaner in the whole. It's all sort of lining up for him on this record. It's a bit more metal than rock than the previous one. It's a bit more dramatic, and I think Bruce was actually playing to his strengths a bit more in this one. Not to the heights that you'd want him to do, but I thought this was a step forward from the previous album. The flavour brought in by the band was really interesting. There's an organic feel, but it's clear that the groove and the rhythm that they play with give Bruce a different platform, because, you know, Maiden has the galloping stuff and the riff-driven stuff. This one has a bit of that Latin touch going on in the rhythms, and that was really interesting to see Bruce play off of against that. And lyrically, this has a bit of depth to it, too. It almost flirts with some political territory, which I didn't expect. As always, the lyrics are well done, but you still get what you want from a solo or side project, which is a little bit of a switch. I know that at this point in time, needed to do something bigger and better than this to wow the crowd out there, but going back in hindsight now, thought that was well done. The production was solid, though it is time-stamped with that mid-90s era, especially the guitar tone for mine, but it's pretty evenly balanced without being a complicated mix. It's just simple, straightforward. It's a touch deadened, which was also a thing for the time, so I'm being a bit picky in that regard. It was, like I said, everyone was slowing down, but also was putting up this dense sound wall kind of thing where there was not a lot of depth going on in the mix, which that shits me about that kind of music. While it's good and it does sort of step up from the previous release, this does suffer from being one-paced, where the previous album had a lot more diversity. This one just seems to just go. It just meanders its way through the 40-odd minutes of this one, 50 minutes, sorry. And so you get a little bit of a gear change, but it's like going from second to third as opposed to first to fifth kind of thing. You don't get a huge change in things here. Basically, if you like, melody, grooves, and riffs, this is one you will check out. Each song on its own is solid. It's just the overall package in a big block is too much of the same thing for me. Although I did, like I said before, enjoy the groove and swing accent in the writing of this. Good album, a little bit better than the last one because this one does feel a little bit more cohesive to me as opposed to Tattooed Millionaire. This feels more like an album, but I do understand also that when you dig into this album a bit more, there are a few issues with how this is getting produced and labels getting involved and stuff as well. So it's a bit of a funny time for poor old Bruce. I did mark it slightly higher. I gave it 7.5 out of 10. I picked Sacred Cowboys, 1,000 Points of Light and Tears of the Dragon as well. So now we go on to the opposite side of the coin, because that one didn't go as well as it could have done. So let's see how Small Deadly Space from Fight stacks up against it. This is 10 tracks for 48 minutes, the second and final studio album from this American band, released April 95 via Epic, produced by Addy Boy. Again, the lineup is the same as the last one, except for a change on guitar with Mark Chaussee coming in to replace Satchel on this release. So Dave, over to you.
This kicks off strong and does not let go. Killer guitar tone and riffs, every song delivers the goods.
Oh, fantastic.
It's not Priest, but it's very metal, and Halford's vocals suit this perfectly. Solid album from start to finish, never a dull moment. It pretty much kept the ball running with what they started on the first album, but just refined it to make it bigger, better, badder. You can tell they've worked really hard on each one of these songs and make them the best that they can be. They've trimmed the fat before they committed it to tape. They've probably demoed it a while, played it a few times, and they had wanted to make a decent album, and they did. There's a few modern effects in the production on his vocals, which was cool. That brings Halford into the 90s, basically.
I wasn't sure how you go with that because you don't tend to like effects on things much. So
yeah, well, it actually worked in this sense, and
okay, cool.
It didn't take away from his natural voice, but it just sounded cool.
Yeah.
So it's not as bad as some of the shit that's been done in the 90s. It really distracts.
Yeah,
it's just heightened, which works. He's growing a hell of a lot more than Bruce Dickinson at this point. I gave this 10 out of 10.
Wow.
I stand up with Small Deadly Space, I Am Alive, Mouthpiece, and Never Again.
Cool. All right. Mick?
Yeah. I love this album. Like, I know I said I loved War of Words, but this one is Fight finding their feet or finding their sound, because it doesn't sound like another band. It does sound like what was going on at the time, but this album doesn't sound like anybody. It sounds like finally they're just writing together. I liked the addition of the new guy on guitar. I thought he was even a better fit than Satchel.
Yeah.
I just loved what he brought to it. Just quickly, there was a little EP.
There was, yeah.
In case listeners and viewers out there, we're not neglecting it. It just was remixes and live tracks, which is the norm back then. Everybody did a dance album and a metal album or a remix album or some bullshit thing back in the day, So, and that's kind of cool. That's good to check out for the live tracks and stuff like that. But getting back to this one, it is fucking one of the biggest and thickest guitar tones I think I've ever come across. That is just fucking great, that sound. But in a very natural and organic way. It's not like a Fear Factory thickness where there's a lot of effects. It's just amps and fucking the way they've mic'd it, and Jesus Christ, whatever guitars and pickups and all the little bits and pieces to get that tone was just fucking fantastic. And I hadn't heard the remaster until literally minutes beforehand. I was just flicking through because I know this album very well, and the remaster does not hurt it at all. It actually enhances everything again. Because it sounded good initially back in 95, I think it came out or something like that.
The original was released in 95.
Yeah. So whenever this come out and whatever they've done, it has worked for it. There is a different vocal track, though, on, and I did write it down, Beneath the Violence is a different vocal.
Okay.
It might have been one of the outtakes or something as opposed to the original album, which I didn't mind. It did prick my ears up because I wasn't used to hearing this on the remaster, but it's more of a traditional Halford take as opposed to what ended up on the original release, because I thought what I really liked about Halford here was how controlled and measured he was with his vocals.
Yeah.
It wasn't all about that high, screechy screaming, and there's a lot of lower guttural, which he did on the first album, but this one, he took another step further. Some really cool, subtle melody, like in between being really high and really low. There was some nice sort of mid-vocal stuff going on. Like Never Again was a song that I thought just, he wasn't pushing overly hard. It was kind of natural for him to do that.
Yep.
But still had that little bit of that Priest twist, you know. I just thought these collections of songs were fantastic. You know, I do agree with Dave that they did work on this album and really, you know, sort of went over with a fine-tooth comb, you know, to get all the little bits and pieces. There's a lot of little guitar bits and bits, you know, that if you just skim over it, you won't get it. It's one where the more you listen to it, the more you can get bits and pieces out of it too.
Definitely,
But the standout for me was what Rob was doing with his vocals.
Yeah.
You know, just really pushing himself to be different, but not straying too far. So, yes, it's a different band, a different era, a different feel. It's past Priest and whatever else, but it's not too far where you go, who the hell is this guy? You know, it's... again, another underrated album. I gave it a 9.5 out of 10. I really can't fault it at all. The standouts for me were Legacy of Hate, Never Again, Small Deadly Space, and Human Crate. But there is a bonus track which used to come on with the 90s albums too, called Psycho Suicide.
Okay,
you get down fucking like 10, 15 minutes after the album supposedly finished. It's a cool little hidden track in there as well. So, but yeah, no, very good. For those Priest fans that haven't heard this stuff, you've got to check it out. I think you get something out of it. So,
well, the audience polling, did rate this one pretty highly, which I'll get to that in a moment. For me, this was even like you were saying, you know, that they found their sound. It's interesting they called it a day after this album because it is a solid one.
Yeah, I know. I would have liked 3 or 4 more releases from Fight, you know. So
there was a lot there to work with, but I don't know what happened there. Pretty much picks up where the last one left off. The grit and the rumble in the tones on this was impressive. It's got that, it's heavy bass driven kind of thing. It's got the groove to go with that. It's sort of groove metal mixed with grunge is where I think they just sort of found their niche, and the vocal work over the top with some of the layering and the trackings to be a little bit of an Ozzy Osbourne kind of effect combined with Halford's normal style really worked and played in that space nicely. It's all that riffs and melody. The vocals are back just a touch on the mix with the bottom end of this really pushed out in the front, and that actually allows the different tones, because Halford's vocal, generally speaking, being high, to play off against the bottom end. That was really nicely done. I just thought that as a consequence of that, the cymbals were a little bit washed out, which was a bit sort of but the rest of it, though, makes a lot of sense with what they were doing, and it does sonically work pretty well. This has some interesting layering too, which was a bit of a surprise. It added a bit of drama without taking away the dark heaviness, like the effects that were being talked about before by Dave in particular. They really brought something, you know, accented things like you were saying there. Those little points of difference that were on the previous album, though, weren't quite here on this one for me. It's got good energy. It ebbs and flows just enough to keep it interesting, but it just didn't have as much as the previous album to really lock me in on it. Once you're locked in, I can see what you're saying. Like, if you are locked in on this record, it's going to take you for a ride for the majority of this record that you're going to really, really love. It didn't quite grab me as much as it grabbed you guys. It's got good energy. It's a pretty simplistic record overall, though, which is not a bad thing. But the energy and the grit with the things, it's just the right amount of mud in this too. That it was more about the tempo. It just didn't quite shift enough for me overall. But all that said, the last 2 tracks is where this album got really interesting, and that bumped it up for me again. So when I was sort of getting a little bit tired of that pace, the last 2 tracks really shifted it in a big way. The last one is a ballad, but it really did help to close it, especially on repeat cycles. It gives you a palate cleanse before you go back down the road again. So those were good touches. Maybe put them in different spots in the album to maybe shift it a bit for me, but overall it's still a very, very good album. I did enjoy it a lot, just probably not quite as much as the debut. I gave the debut an 8.5. I gave this one an 8. And I picked Human Crate, Never Again, and I'm Alive. So we've got some crossovers and some different choices in the standouts there. So we're universally agreed that this is a better album than Balls to Picasso. So this wins round 2 for us. And for the audience choice, it was actually a tie between the 2 albums, which was an interesting result. I didn't expect that one. So that was a different thing there. So far, we have, it's basically off to an interesting start with 2-1. It's going to Rob Halford so far. He's up 2-1. Can Bruce Dickinson make a comeback with round 3? Here we go. This is Bruce Dickinson with SKUNKWORKS, 13 tracks for 47 minutes, the 3rd studio album from Bruce, released February 96 via Castell, produced by Jack Endino. This was initially intended to be an album released under the name SKUNKWORKS as a band, but the record label refused to do anything apart from release it under Bruce Dickinson's name. Mick?
Yeah, I knew that only recently, to be honest with you. I didn't actually know there was some kind of band that was a SKUNKWORKS or whatever the whole backstory is. It makes sense not to release it under SKUNKWORKS, to be honest with you, I think. This one reminds me, how do I put it? You know, when an artist sort of is probably at the crossroads, and I reckon Bruce, 3 or 4 years after Maiden, things aren't really going where he thinks they were gonna go, or so he goes, what was a popular sound that I had but to write new songs on? I reckon this album has a flavour of Seventh Son.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Yep.
It's very bright. It's very lean in terms of guitars and stuff like that. It's very soft. It's softer. It's got a softer feel, a brighter sound with the guitars and stuff, and it does remind me of Seventh Son a lot.
It jumps out in comparison to the rest of the records we've had so far.
Which is a good thing, because I like how every album has its own sound and feel and stuff like that. It's not a carbon copy of one or the other, you know. But it does remind me of Seventh Son a lot. The sound. The songs don't. The songs don't sound like Maiden at all, which is not a bad thing. I think this is finally him trying to think about the fans and how he will get them back. So this is more along the lines of something Maiden might have done at that point in time, or could have done, you know, in some elements of some of the songs on this album. I find this album a little too long. I think it's probably 3 songs too long. It's sort of, it does take a flow and a journey and all that kind of stuff, but it does, I felt myself, after listening to it again after a while, tuning out, because it's sort of a lot of similarities, a lot of, there wasn't a lot of variety, I guess, which we had prior to Bruce Dickinson, you know, albums. The first couple had a lot of variety, maybe the first one in particular. The second one was still had changes, although it was more cohesive, which was agreed on. But this one was very much almost a formula of one song, and you've kind of heard majority of the album. Having said that, again, Bruce shines on this because his voice, I don't know what the fuck he does, but he never sounds bad. He sounds still great today. I don't know how he does it, but it's a testament to him and everything he's been through.
After cancer,
he's done all that and got through it, which is great. Having said that, there's some really, really big hooks on this fucking album vocally. Like, there's some powerful choruses which you don't get in metal today. Even with some Iron Maiden stuff, it's not as hooky as what this fucking shit is.
I missed that, actually.
I miss the big choruses, the big stadium choruses. You know, it's like everyone's getting away from it for some reason, or
I don't know why.
I don't know what it is. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I still think it's a strong album. I still think now he's starting to find his feet of where he should be going. And I think if I remember right, reviews were favourable for this one as well. You know, the standouts for me from Back from the Edge, Inertia, Solar Confinement, and Strange Death in Paradise.
Cool. All right, Dave, what did you make of this one?
I got mid-90s riffing with old school melodies. Bit of a ebb and flow there. It's kind of like you got the vibe of a singer from the 80s trying to modernize, and you had a lot of that around 96, 98 in that era.
Yeah.
And there was a very dark time. There was a whole new style happening, so anyone that was trying to make an album tried to contemporize, and it didn't exactly fit with what they were good at. But to be fair, I did enjoy most of this album. It was good to hear songs that his vocals did fit to. It was a bit more... It wasn't on the rock side. It's not exactly metal, but it's...
Yeah, this was more suited to his caper. I think the style was more suited, overall, you know.
Yeah, because if they were going to release this under a different name, you can get the idea that they were kind of working together as a band more than I got some songs I want some music to. So overall, it's a more complete package than some of his stuff previously. Songwriting's pretty good. Probably the album I've enjoyed the most from him so far. Yeah. And I never knew this existed. I had never heard this album or this band at all. But yeah, it was. But he's probably his best to date. I still give it a 6 out of 10. Standard were Space Race, Faith, and I Will Not Accept the Truth.
Okay. It's funny that we're all talking about sort of how much brighter this one is, because it put me in mind of Rush's production a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, not the guitar tone, the vocal tone, which will drive Dave absolutely bonkers. But the sonic space where this album sat was very much sort of the Rush, the bright edge to it all. Really sort of, like I was saying before, this is a huge contrast, especially when you jump from Fight to this. It's so just opposite spectrum.
It's night and day, really.
It really is. And like in the context of going through these albums, it was a nice, refreshing change. But at the same time, it's just, wow, that's a huge, out of the whole thing, that's a huge gear shift. The use of effects on things like the guitar on this were a little example too that sort of tied into that. Like the Rush kind of thing. Just the different effects I'm putting on things gave me that, where the three-piece is trying to make it a really big sound, an interesting sound with Rush. These guys are doing different things at the same time to try and get a similar kind of an effect going on. I really like how much this one breathes. Musically, it's bright as well. It's also very spacious. Like between the mix and the songs, there was a lot of air and space for things to sort of breathe and resonate, which is a nice, again, another gear shift in this whole thing. And different lyrics again too. This one has that 90s feel in that regard. At the same time, though, it's a bit outside of the regular stream of what was happening at this particular time, so it stood out a little bit, which was a good thing for Bruce to do at this point in time as well, I think. And it was I thought it was a more dramatic record than his previous one, definitely. It had the gear changes and better use of light and shade across a record. I liked when it did get intense, there was a nice level of that on here. Thought the panning and the layering, the production skills were nice on this, and they added to the vibe. It's not we're making it sound bright and happy. It's not a happy listen, but the tones and the mix give this a spark, which sort of gives it, a bit more of a...
It's slick.
Yeah.
I guess it'd be the best way to put it, where everything is sort of dirty and, it doesn't have that grunge element where it should have, because that was the era that we were in at that point in time. So,
like, if you can't pull that off, then go the opposite way and see how it works for you. And that's what they've done with this. They've gone the opposite way of everyone else, and it worked on this record for mine.
It works for Bruce. I just think he wasn't trying as hard vocally either. You can sort of just sing into the songs and felt effortless,
Like you said, he doesn't put out a bad album vocally. He just can't. He cannot sing badly.
No, he doesn't. He can't, and he won't. This is how it is.
Yeah. This is a record that none of it is outstanding, but none of it is bad. It's all very good, solid songs. And while there are gear changes, this is, again, a bit of a one-paced album for mine. Another that leaves it to the end to bring something different, a bit more special. This one doesn't quite go as well as it did on the previous Fight record. So, Small Deadly Space had the better end of an album than this one did when we come into it. But that said, it's still a good album. It's got good songs, but the thing is that it's just good. But that said, this does feel like a step up from his previous two releases for me as well. So the same thing as Dave. I'm getting an incremental improvement as he goes along, which is interesting. We'll see where it goes from here. I gave this one an 8 out of 10. I picked Solar Confinement, Inner Space, and Strange Death in Paradise as well. So we've got some crossovers there. So now we move on to probably one of the more interesting ones we're going to get out of this. I'm really curious as to how Dave's going to go with this one. So we'll go to him first in just a second. This is 2 with Voyeurs. 11 tracks for 47 minutes. The one and only album from this collaboration between Rob Halford and guitarist John Five. Released March 98 by Nothing Records, produced by Bob Marlett and Dave Ogilvy. Though this didn't do very well in sales, it's become something of a cult classic over the years. So Dave, what have you to say to the fans of this record?
I miss Fight.
We are not surprised.
No. This is Dave's version of We Are Not Amused.
How dare you? Heavy riffing, but also heavily produced, and which more often than not really distracts from the songs. Halford sounds unrecognizable for the most part. And when I did some research after hearing this and found out John Five was on here, he deserves better than this. I've heard his stuff with Manson. I've heard his stuff with Rob Zombie. Fuck. He must have been having an off day.
Mm-hmm.
The songs are terrible. The production is horrible. I hate this. The only thing good about this was making fun of the album songs. I was going through while I was listening. My ceiling's low. Not low enough. Leave me alone. I wish you would. Deep in the ground. That's exactly where this belongs. In the bin.
Shit. All right.
Wow. Okay. That's our first bin for the night. I wonder if it'll be our only one. Mick, what have you got to say in response?
This is the only one that I never got around to buying, and I only heard it today. So, and Dave and I were having a quick chat just during the day about things, and I said I had to go and listen to this album, and I kind of knew that Dave wouldn't like it, and I knew about the album. I heard about it. I actually didn't know that John Five was on it. For such a quote-unquote great guitarist, he doesn't do a lot on this album.
That's true.
I didn't mind it. I guess the only thing we haven't got to compare to is Bruce never went and tried to do an industrial album, you know?
Yeah. And let's not make a mistake here. Rob's not alone in doing this. Dio.
No, he's not. There's a few bands going on at the time, you know, that were, I guess, they were thinking that this was going to be a big thing, and they, you know, like Wasp. I mean, I like the Kill Fuck Die album. But that gets a lot of, you know, criticism for that being that style, you know. I remember Ministry taking off in a big way, and they were probably somewhat innovators of maybe bringing this style in, and so I got why he wanted to do it. I would have been happy if he had said, "I'm just doing this, but I'm going to do another Fight album."
That would have been cool, yeah.
The fact that he just abandoned Fight and cut that and put it in the bin, I'll never really understand. I can understand from a business perspective, and I think the biggest thing about artists that are in well-established bands is they forget how they got there. And they're used to the stadiums and everything, and when they want to do something else, so they think they're just that established, and it just should be automatic, and it's not. They find it hard to deal with, you know. And I don't think it's just ego. I just think I need to go, what's the new thing to keep myself relevant, where all I had to really do was just do what they've always done. But that's, again, a hindsight thing. I mean, you know, I'm sure all of us would be doing that if we were in their shoes. So I didn't mind that he tried this style. I don't think it's as bad as what it gets the criticism for. Having said that, the songs aren't strong. And it tails off pretty badly. And I think that's the problem, that it's very formulaic, formula-based. It's sort of like every song has the same part and the same breakdown and the same, you know, this is where we'll bring back the guitar. So, yes, this is Rob again pushing himself vocally and stuff like that. He
different.
He thought he was doing different stuff on Fight. Well, if you haven't heard this,
yeah,
it is very, 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 very different vocally. There wasn't. Look, I gave it a 5 out of 10. It was neither here or there for me. I knew about the style he was doing or whatever, so I was prepared for it. I think if I had went out back in the day being 16-year-old Mick and bought this album because it was a new Rob Halford album, I would have been, what the fuck? I probably would have thrown it across the road.
Yep.
But I'm okay with it for what it is and the time it was done. The standouts for me were Water's Leaking, Leave Me Alone. This is a real shit title, but wasn't a bad song. But Hey Shalala.
Yeah.
But the last 4 or 5, probably the last 4 songs are very weak. So it doesn't. I was dragging my feet to the end of this one.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if it had been an EP, it might have been a different story. But
probably, yeah.
Yeah.
It does drag for its 47 minutes, this one. You can see why it was released on Nothing Records, because this is directly out of that era, like Nothing Interscope that had the corner of the market on this one, and this is why it was released on this record label. And you can see why Nothing did it as well. They think they're going to get Rob Halford to do a record that's going to come in on the back of what Korn and all that were doing at the time, and didn't quite grab the way everyone thought it would, I think. It's got a big pounding sound on it. It's riff driven. There's a bit going on under it with the effects and all that sort of stuff. Nothing over the top, but it does have a very different flavour to anything we've heard from Bruce before. Like I was saying, it's the most different thing we've heard from him yet. I don't think I've heard vocals, because for all the effects, there are times on this where they do vocals from Rob, that have little to no effects, no reverb, nothing. And
they're mixed very low in the mix as well, like they're almost inaudible, and it's just like, okay, why are you doing that?
Yeah,
it's
all this
not
other
going to
stuff
sell
really,
the fucking song, just having a guitar riff with a almost half dance beat, like, yeah.
It was 2 people in a studio, everything, all the drums were programmed, there's a lot of effects going on, and when you've got all that sort of glossy side of production happening, and very much a studio record, to have the vocals as dry as that was really, really interesting, and I haven't heard that from Rob before. So that was interesting, if nothing else. I don't think it necessarily worked, but it was interesting. When you go through the credits, like I say, there's a lot of drum programming, and that shows. It's not going to win everyone, not this record, and it clearly didn't in the end. But if you don't mind this era, there's enough here to check out. Not a groundbreaking album in the grand scheme of things, though. The production is straight out of the era. I think it's from that era of things. This has aged pretty well. Not overly complicated. There's a lot of cut and paste going on in here as well, which will either win or lose people. It was all the rage at the time. When you think about Rob Halford doing an album of this style at that time, I'm surprised that this fell away so quickly. I would have thought this would. I'm not saying the songs themselves deserved it, but it's kind of interesting how the songs themselves have shown that you actually still need the good songs, not just the name and the style.
Yeah, the songs are weak. They're not really that good songs. That's the problem. If it had been strong songs in that style, it'll be a matter of taste. But the songs aren't that good, for the caliber of musician that John Five is. Yep. And then we'll put Halford together. You think, geez, this should be fucking amazing no matter what they fucking do. But
didn't come off that way.
No.
The other side of that for me too was that like you were saying, the back half of this record really does drag this one down a hole too. The first half was reasonably strong, but the second half just killed it. Yeah. That's not strong enough. This is not a strong enough record to compete. Like I was saying, it's surprising that it didn't do well in a marketing sense, but on a musicality and merit sense, this is not strong enough to compete at all. I generally like this era a bit. There's a lot of these records that are staples in my collection, but this isn't one of those ones. And the time that have passed since hasn't made these. The production is the mark, but the songs haven't aged with it.
I don't mind the production. I think the
production worked.
Okay,
yeah, the production held up okay. It's the songs that haven't held this one together at all.
That's right. Yeah,
it's not terrible. Like I know that Dave binned it. I don't find it terrible. But there's only a few tracks here that are really worth going to. for me, the technical way it was put together, along with getting a different side of Halford's vocals, are what made this one interesting to me. I gave it a 6 out of 10. I picked "Leave Me Alone," "Start a Kiss," and "I'm a Pig." So there were some interesting song titles on this one as well. So universally, between us and the audience, I know that people are going to worry about this being a comparison in time and stuff, and people were saying this comparison didn't work. But between us and the audience, this one did go to Bruce Dickinson. So he finally gets one round on the board. So it's currently 2-1 in favour of Rob Halford. How's everyone going? Everyone still keeping up all right? We're just going to keep ploughing through?
I think for now, I've got another one left in me before I probably need another beer, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah. All right, let's do another round. We've got Bruce Dickinson with "Accident of Birth" for 12 tracks for 54 minutes. The fourth solo studio album from Bruce, released May 97 via CMC International and Zomba Music, produced by Roy Z. This album not only sees that reunion with Roy, but also sees Bruce working with Adrian Smith once again as well. Mick, over to you.
Yeah, see, I've got to go with a little bit of a backstory here. I didn't hear this one in order. So I heard Chemical Wedding, and then I got...
Okay.
I missed this one back in the day. So I missed this and Skunkworks, to be honest with you, because after Picasso, I was like, he's fucking done, And then at that point in time, I was still sticking with Maiden, but I wasn't getting a lot from them. So I was moving into a different direction with Pantera and Machine Head, and, I was... That was the metal that was sort of taking over for me at that point in time. So these ones I heard, later on. But finally, Bruce is doing what he should have always fucking done from the beginning. Mm-hmm. With Maiden, without Maiden, whatever. This is it. I think we've touched on this album before in the past, but this is everything that suits Bruce's voice. It's the right amount of heavy. It's the good riffing. There's plenty of melodies that lean towards Maiden, but just play differently. So they're not carbon copy Maiden rip-offs, but the addition of Adrian Smith has helped this album immensely.
That's a big change.
And it just showed how much pull he had in Maiden, because when he left Maiden, the two albums they did, I think it was 4 by that point in time, weren't as strong as Up to Seventh Son. All right, that's just being straight out. That's how it is.
And that's why when they all came back together with Iron Maiden, it worked.
Well, they only did a really, really shitty album called Brave New World, which is fucking amazing. But putting that all aside, Adrian Smith probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves on this album. I know a lot of people paired them up like it's a Bruce and Adrian thing, but I still think a lot of people don't know that he was on the album. I think Roy Z, or Roy Z, as we say.
Like we say down here.
I think now they're working towards, Bruce, you're a metal front man. Let's write a metal album.
Yeah.
Not over the top heavy and whatever else, but something that you can sink your teeth into. And he delivers. Again, Bruce doesn't know how to sing badly. I don't think he was ever, I'm sure when he came out the birth canal, he was like, and they're like, that's the most happiest, great sounding baby I've ever fucking heard in my life. And it just carried on from there, I gave this album a 9 out of 10, and I don't even know why I took a point off, because it's fucking solid as fuck. It is great. I love it. I still love it to this day. It had enough modern touch production wise to not make it sound dated.
Yep.
It still holds up today.
Yep.
If this was to come out today, because I think he's doing a solo album as we speak.
Oh, okay, cool.
Brand new one. If this was to come out, it would still work now.
Yeah.
So this has held up really well for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, 9 out of 10. What are my standouts? Where am I? Okay. Accident of Birth, Dark Side of Aquarius, Man of Sorrows, and Freak. But really, this is another one from top to bottom that nothing's filler. It's all killer.
Cool. All right, Dave.
You can pretty much just copy-paste what Mick said. First point was finally a heavy metal solo album from Bruce. This is exactly what you would expect with the singer from Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
He gets to use his full vocal range on here, which I haven't heard on a solo album until this point. And Adrian Smith, it's another thing that's been missing. He needed that sound that Adrian provided.
Yeah.
And as Mick said, it's just like, let's make a metal album. Let's do what we do. Rather than catering to whatever trends might have been around at the time, let's just be us and do what we do.
Yep.
Killer riffs, solos, fun, catchy lyrics. It's an enjoyable listen from start to finish. And I have to point out, Amiga, it was very interesting to hear an acoustic intro to this song. Like, nothing like it's going to be a full-on acoustic song.
Yeah.
To this point, we hadn't heard Bruce sing over an acoustic guitar. He did it on Jenny Man on Dance of Death after this.
Yeah.
This is the first time you hear that, and it works really well.
Oh, no, Wasting Love is pretty much acoustic-based, and that's off Fear of the Dark. So.
Yeah, clean tone electric. This is actual acoustic.
Is it not acoustic and electric, that song? Like, it sounds like it.
Could be. I'll have to go back and listen now. You split my brain. But yeah, it could be.
But it doesn't happen often, so I'll give you that.
No, it doesn't happen often at all.
Yeah, 8 out of 10. Stands for Freak, Taking the Queen, Dark Side of Aquarius, Amiga, and Accident at Birth.
Nice. All right. Well, this is much grittier than the last album. So you go from SKUNKWORKS to this, and that whole Rush bright element, that's not here anymore. This is much darker, much more dense, but it still has enough to breathe in it, which is nice. The vocal harmonies on this, the note choices were a bit Alice in Chains, which was the cool part about the era that this is coming from. Just the note choices, but also the lyrics were sort of darker and more brooding on this release. It's definitely back much more into your traditional metal territory, which you guys have covered off very, very well. The riffs, the melodies, the hooks rule this one, but the rhythm pounds away under this nicely. There's some really good attack on this record, which I think was what has been universally recognised as being missing from Bruce's albums up until now. To go along with that grit, there are some nice tones captured too. Some really nice moments where things are allowed to ring out. The solo in Taking the Queen was a really good example of what I'm talking about there. The way that sonically opened up was brilliant. Some nice panning as well, and the shifts used on how things get pushed or pulled back in the mix was really good. That really allowed your focus to shift, and it was overall solid, but it gave you that 3D depth that you want when you're listening to it. There were subtle things like synth and effects and other instruments used really well in this, just enough to fill things out and give you a bit different flavours here and there. But Adrian Smith, I think, is the unsung hero of working with Bruce Dickinson, and the dual guitar riffs are alone a good example of what was brought into this band, because he hadn't had that from his work until now either. What's really cool about this is how you get that Latin touch still from the rhythm section that was nice on Balls to Picasso, but you get that working well with the more Maiden touches brought in by Adrian Smith and the vocals of Bruce Dickinson. So those two worlds are now colliding, which is a really good melting pot for what you've got going on here. So the album flow was nice. I like the bleeding of one track into another. The diversity was all placed. There's all the gear shifts you're looking for in an album as well. And there were some really nice little touches of Foley here and there for dramatic effect. Thought the solos were really tasteful and brought the songs to life. They weren't overdone. Nothing here was overplayed. It was all in all, this is a very welcome change of pace for mine. It's a very well-rounded piece of work. It feels like a genuine album from a real band. Like, the cohesion on this was what was most important to me. And it's probably the most organic of Bruce's solo releases up until now for mine as well. Well worth the listen. I gave this an 8.5 out of 10. So this continues the trend for me of incremental increases. So 8.5 out of 10 for me. Dark Side of Aquarius, Accident at Birth, and Freak for my standouts on this one. As we move now into Halford territory, we've gone away from Fight. We've gone from 2. We're going to Halford with Resurrection. 16 tracks for 61 minutes. The debut album from this particular band, released August 2000 via Metal God, which I believe is Rob Halford's own label. Produced by Roy Z again. This one was recorded over about 2 years and also features a duet with Bruce Dickinson in this one as well. So we're getting the whole fucking kit and caboodle on this one. So, Dave, over to you.
This is the only Halford album I'd heard before doing this process, and I've always enjoyed this album. I have to say, title is perfect, especially after the previous album. This is the Resurrection of the Metal God. This band is on fire, and it's more traditional sound than Fight, more traditional metal. But once again, it's a totally different thing to what you get on Priest. So I think he keeps reinventing himself, different bands. 2000 was a very interesting, the early 2000s was interesting because you had kids rediscovering metal, thanks to Guitar Hero and VH1. So it's just like, okay, I've heard about these bands. where are they, what are they doing? So it's a perfect time for some of these bands to either reform or to start writing what they used to do.
Yeah.
And this ticks all the right boxes. Performances, songwriting, production, guitar tones, solos, melody, all great. Love it. I was listening to this in my car, and the One You Love to Hate came on, and I hadn't heard Accident at Birth yet. I was listening to Resurrection. Like, oh, cool, one of Bruce Dickinson now. Finally something good. Like, oh, no, we're still on Halford. He's just a guest.
Yep.
So, yeah, it gives you an idea of some of the previous albums from Dickinson.
Yeah.
If Halford hadn't returned the Priest, that wouldn't have been a problem for his career, I don't think. He keeps releasing albums like Fight and Resurrection. He could have had a career like Ozzy.
Yep.
He could easily have toured under his own name. I gave it 10 out of 10. Made in Hell, Locked and Loaded, Silent Screams, The One You Love to Hate, Sad Wings, and Saviors.
What'd you give it, sorry?
10.
10. Beautiful. All right. Yeah, no, the dog got up and decided to eat a fly at the moment you said that, which kind of...
As you do around this time of night. So,
yeah.
You know,
catch it with a chopstick.
The 8:30 special. So.
Yeah, and as the weather's warming up, the flies are coming out and the dogs are going hunting. Anyway, over to you, Mick.
Yeah, no, I was having a discussion with Nick. Who else was it? Nick and somebody. I can't remember the other person now. And they really talked this album up. I'm a little bit the other way. I find that this album is really good, but it's a bit of a step back from where he would gone. Now, let's take Voyagers out.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Small Deadly Space. This doesn't take it a step forward. This actually, for me, this is an album where he's playing it safe. It's like Dave said, it's a little bit more traditional. I do like the production. It sounds okay. It's very much a Roy Z sound that he was doing then. But the songs aren't quite there for me. As good as it is, you know, I prefer the Fight stuff over this album still. Both albums, that is. It was a little. It just didn't have interesting factors about it. It was a little too, you know, simplistic. Having said that, it was more of the vocal style that we've come to love from Rob. So he was singing in his element, you know. But I still reckon it was. I think Priest was doing better stuff than Halford at this point. If I had to go back to Jugulator or Demolition, that era, I prefer those albums over this one. So, having said that, I still think it's it's one of the stronger albums of late 90s, 2000. I still gave it an 8 out of 10.
Wow, cool.
Locked and Loaded, Nightfall, and you had to add The One You Love to Hate, because just Bruce and Halford doing one song together. At that point in time, I thought maybe they might tour together.
That would have been cool.
But yeah, no, I thought it sounded like a leftover Dickinson song, to be honest with you, more than it does a Halford song. But having said that, it's just not as up to the standard. It's not far behind Fight, but not quite as good.
Yep. Cool. Well, for mine, right from the start, this one gets your attention. That trademark Halford sound is well and truly back on this record, especially after the previous one we've gone through. It's right back in the solid metal territory. This kicks hard, really driving riffs and rhythm. That has that traditional platform from which Halford just goes fucking bang. The lyrics go along with that intensity, has the hooks on it again, which is really cool. And there is, again, really nice attack on this record. But when the groove kicks in, the swing of this, that was awesome on this record. You'll be headbanging to this pretty bloody quick. This has that infectious energy about it, which will get you interested pretty bloody quick. I thought the mix was nice and punchy. It has a nice amount of the subtle softness kind of applied to it, but I loved how harmonies get to just float in over the top. There was this really dramatic sort of over-the-top harmonies, which just sort of echoed through. It was really well done. That added some really nice depth to this, and it's just got that vintage touch about it all without being dated. I've got to give a nod to Roy Z, or Z, whatever, at this point in time. He's worked with both artists incredibly well. He's probably the man of the match for the whole bloody thing when you get to the end of this, just what he's been able to work with these guys. His mixes are pretty damn good overall. I love the old school approach with things like hard panning and not allowing, but it still doesn't allow things to be too dated because he's always kept with the time but not really locked himself into a particular era. Some of this, like Hell's Last Survivor, would fit right into the Priest catalogue, and that isn't a bad thing at this point in time. There's more to it than that on this record by a long way, but that's a nice aspect to have present finally after a while now here. While the edition we've got on this one from Spotify is a bit longer than the original, one of the quirky things I noticed was that you can't really tell, unless you go through the notes, which songs were the offcasts that made it into this bonus edition and which ones were the original final cut kind of a thing. I thought that was actually really good, and it shows you the strength of the songs, that the ones they cut still fit in and they were still produced the same level as the rest of the stuff as well. So there were no shortcuts taken. It was just a matter of what's going to fit on the format, basically, at the end of the day. I thought the track order was engaging just enough to keep it interesting. Some nice little bits of diversity in there. It is a longer listen, and in the end you do feel that a bit with this one. But there isn't anything bad on this record at all. If you're a fan of metal or just Halford's vocals, this is one you're going to have to check out. I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. I picked Locked and Loaded, Nightfall, and Fetish. And Fetish is one of those bonus tracks that wasn't on the original one. So that's how much I enjoyed those tracks. That was really cool. The interesting part about this round in particular is that for my scores, that was a draw. Dave gave it to Halford, Mick gave it to Dickinson, and the audience gave it to Halford. So by audience vote, this round goes to Halford. So this is it's currently a 3-to-1 ratio. So the best we can get at this point in time is a tie as we move along. Do we want to keep going, or do people need to refill? Where are we at?
I'll have a drink.
You got a drink? All right, cool. So quick break. We're back from a short little hiatus there. We're going to go into Bruce Dickinson with The Chemical Wedding. 13 tracks for 71 minutes. The fifth solo studio record from Bruce, released September 1998 by Sanctuary, produced again by Roy Z. This album sees the same lineup as the last album from Bruce Return and takes some inspiration from the works of the English poet William Blake. Mick.
Yes. This is when I took a gamble and I'd seen that Bruce had put out a new album and I just bought it.
Okay.
And I wasn't expecting much, and I thought I probably wasted $30 at that point in time, but threw it in the car at that point, and I was like, fuck me. Why aren't Maiden doing this?
Yeah.
You know, at that point in time when I was comparing everything.
Yep.
It's like, fuck, they need to get him back.
Mm-hmm.
We all know what happened there. It probably was on the back of this album.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. This was, again, touching on it, I heard this beforehand, before Accident of at Birth. So now that we're doing them in proper order, I already had a good inkling. So I went and brought Accident at Birth straight away. So to see how he got from where he was to this. So, but anyways, this pretty much continues on from Accident of Birth, but in a different light. It's a darker album. It's a darker sound. It's a
more brooding.
It is. It's very conceptual in some areas. I don't know if it's a concept album or it was intended to be, but it feels like it's a continuing story throughout the album.
The execution does that.
Yeah, and but having said that, when generally concept albums don't work for the majority, this one, if it is that, is a very, very good one. You know, it's very strong. It's like they realize what they did on the previous album. I can't remember the press back then or whatever, but I'm assuming it was probably a positive.
It's pretty well received, yeah.
So it's like, we need to do this, but not do a carbon copy. And I don't think they did. I don't hear any songs on this album that sound like the previous effort.
No.
What it does miss is probably a little bit more of the melodic guitars. It seems to be a lot of a heavy-driven riffing album. But when it does come through, like I think it's in the Tower and a couple other spots where there's some really nice guitar work going on. It's just like, it really lifts the album up, and it's just like, fantastic. Some great playing on it. I can't remember if it's the same lineup as the previous album, but it sounds like it is.
Yeah.
And this lineup worked. And like Dave said with Halford, I think if Bruce was going to continue on this path, the fans would have jumped back on.
They would have abandoned Maiden.
Back to Maiden. If he was going to do this stuff, he would have started getting the bigger gigs, even if that was just the festival gigs. And this stuff alone would have made a huge difference to his career at that point in time.
There's a reason why both these bands got these vocalists back in them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Being proven by these records now.
Yeah. They're writing stuff that is very, very good without us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when your ex was pretty hot to you, but then she becomes a lot hotter when she leaves you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, fuck, I wonder if she'd still be interested. And you try and, but she's got a boyfriend, but you still try and send the text and you be the nice guy. It's like, oh, hey, how you going? I was just thinking of you and blah, 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 small bullshit talk, I think. This is exactly what I wanted. And I was fucking loving it. And I thrashed the shit out of this album.
Awesome.
For weeks. This, I reckon seeing Bruce on Accident and this Chemical Wedding tours would have been fucking great.
Yeah.
Because it would have been playing a lot of that material. Not a lot of Maiden stuff. And I don't think it was really doing any Maiden at all at that point. So to see these songs live would have been fucking awesome. 8.5 out of 10 I gave it. The only reason why I didn't rate it higher is because I just thought some of the intros and the outros could have been edited. And flicking through the newer expanded edition or whatever the fuck it is.
Yeah.
Those songs were okay, but they're not needed. The album was already long enough. I just thought they were just trying to push the whole, well, in order to be metal, we need to have 8.5, 9-minute, 10-minute songs or whatever. And I don't necessarily mean it's bad, but sometimes it's not necessary. Some of the things that were going on, there's I can't remember what song it was, but he just has this spoken word thing that feels like it's 28 minutes long at the end, but it's probably only 2 minutes. But it takes away from the album because it's very impactful in spots.
Yep.
That stuff, I don't know if it adds anything. So that's why I dropped it down to that.
Yep.
Having said that, I'm rambling, so I'll just get to my songs. The Tower, Gates of Horizon, and Machine Men are my standouts.
Cool.
But I really like the whole album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, Dave.
Yeah, this is a fantastic album. And we have heard this, we did review this before, and that was the first time I heard it. And I've listened to it a lot since then. The band sounds great, vocals are great, songwriting is top notch, and Dickinson sounds inspired to get something great out there.
Yep.
With all the many things he does in his life, I'm sure we've all read his book and we know he does lots of things. I think some of his previous albums, he was a little bit too thin spread on what he was doing. He wasn't 100%.
Yep.
With this, he sounds like he's all in. It's definitely the darkest thing I've heard from him at all. Even going back to Maiden, this is the darkest you'll hear Bruce sing on something. Each instrument gets its time to shine. As Mick was saying, it's not always flashy, but when a solo does come in or there's a bass solo at the start of the Tower, it's there for a reason.
Yep.
And these guys can certainly play. It does get a bit proggy at times.
Yep.
I understand what Mick's saying. It can waffle on a little bit maybe in some intros. But, it's just...
that's extremely nitpicking. Because I know it very well, and I think if I was going to fine-tune it, this is what I would do.
I would trim it to it,
30 seconds or something.
Yeah.
Great flow throughout the album. It's got some shorter songs at the start, and then it eases you into some of the more heavier content as it goes along. You can see some of the parts that Steve Harris would have focused on when Bruce got back to Maiden. You can hear it in Brave New World. So what they were doing with the X Factor and Virtual 11, take some elements of this and you pretty much have the Brave New World album. It's like the best of both worlds. I gave this 9 out of 10. My standouts were King and Crimson, Chemical Wedding, The Tower, Jerusalem, and The Alchemist Real World.
Cool.
That's 2 songs.
Well, this one for mine was a bit of a slow burn. Like I said, it was brooding. Bruce really gets to fly vocally on this one. Like, he really launches here, and the lyrics are very interesting to that. William Blake inspiration is present on this record. Riffs and melody rule the day, but this one has a bit more going on, like that proggy sort of touch comes into it a bit. But it is overall a bit more straight ahead than previous releases as well, which sort of makes it flow in. This is an album that starts here and just sort of works its way up as the whole album works, to the payoff. Pretty bottom heavy and dense in the overall mix, but what I missed here, I think this is the only sort of trick that was missed overall in the production, was that I would have loved to have heard this, and not everyone's going to agree with me, but the mix on SKUNKWORKS applied a bit more to this one, give it a bit more brightness. I know that it's a darker tone overall, but this was just a bit too deadened off. I would have liked to have had a bit more breath into it. It would have, I think personally would have added something more to this one. It still sounds good. It's me being very selective in what I would have liked to have heard on this one. Everything is clear, and it's a good mix. It's just a trick that I think was mixed.
It sounds under-mastered.
Yeah, maybe. Because the double track,
it would have been okay. It just has that little bit of a muddy factor to it, or a little bit of over-compression on guitars.
Yeah.
Where just a tad too much. Where
I found it odd that you got double-tracked vocals in there, and the rest of it is so dense kind of thing. So why are you going to all this effort to double-track these high-end vocals, and the mix is sort of flattening it all out? So maybe it is the mastering after all. I don't know.
Also trying to be moving with the bands that was sort of doing that sound. Like it has very much a Machine Head feel that
it is the late 90s.
Sonically, so yeah, I don't know.
It was one of those things, but it still sounded good. It's me being, I want to hear certain things and listen to an album, and everyone's got that. I'm being more critical than I intended because it does sound still good. It just would have been better that way for mine. Once this gets going, because like I said, it starts sort of here and it works its way up as the album goes on for mine. Once it gets going, this is pretty heavy and intense. It's got some great energy, and the solos on this are really well done too. Nothing too fancy, but the whole thing just kicks along really well once it gets its groove on. The spoken little piece is not the extended edition stuff, but the stuff in the middle of the album, and that I thought that worked well. I would have trimmed things like the longer instrumental parts a bit to make it a bit more condensed. The last bit spoken at the very, very end after 2 minutes of silence wasn't really required. That didn't add anything to the album, but there's one earlier on in the album which I thought really worked well. And I thought overall the track order and the flow did serve its purpose. It's not quite that concept album, but I think because of the sounds and the way the album is structured in the track order, it feels like a concept album. It gives you a payoff right toward the end of the record. It really builds up to it. It's not one of those albums you just listen to the first 3 tracks and make up your mind on. You've got to give some time to this one, which might or might not be a good thing, but I think it's a very good, solid album, well worth the time. I do think that the very last ending on the extended edition we've got now, that Confios track, I think that pushed a bridge too far as well. That could have been cut. The original ending, which was, I think, Return of the King, was it The Alchemist?
No. It's before that, yeah.
The Alchemist then. That was the one that, The Alchemist, that was the original ending, and that's where it should have stayed for mine. Yeah. Still a very, very good, solid album. He's certainly sort of getting to a plateau of his peak kind of thing. 8.5 out of 10 for me. The Book of Fell, The Alchemist, and Jerusalem were my standouts. So we go from that now into Halford with Crucible. 16 tracks for 60 minutes, the second studio album from this particular band, released June 2002 by Metal God, produced again by Roy Z. Where the previous album was meant to be a return to the more metal roots, this was made with a conscious effort to actually step away from that a little bit. So, Mick, where did you land with this one?
It's funny you say that, because I find this is the closest one to Priest. I think this is the perfect album. This is my go-to Halford album outside of Fight.
Yep.
This is the one where I rate it really highly. I think as many songs as it is, and I think you said 16 or whatever. Yep. This is not a fatiguing listen or a tiring listen. I can bout through this one easily, and I love it. I think this is everything that I want Halford doing. It was modern Priest. And I find the Ripper Owens era is more modern Priest than even what they're doing now. So this was everything that the best of both worlds. So I love what Priest were doing then, and I really, really, really like this album. And it doesn't get much love, but it's sort of like on the
overlooked
just
a bit
before he rejoined Priest, or was it just as he joined? It was a contractual thing. I can't remember.
It was before he joined back again. Yeah.
Yeah, but at this point in time, I think people weren't caring about what these guys were doing, as much. Like I don't remember much press on it, and it seemed like it came and went as quickly as it come out. But it's really like if you're a Judas Priest fan and you haven't heard a lot of these albums, or a Maiden fan for that matter, you should really check it, especially the back half of these guys' catalogs.
Yeah,
they're quite good. Like this Crucible album, I fucking love it. And it was one of the ones where I wasn't holding much hope, to be honest with you, by this point in time. I thought I'd heard everything I was going to get from Halford. And he surprised me again, because it does have a modern production sound.
Yeah.
But it still has traditional metal songwriting.
Yeah.
And that's what these guys need to do. They need to move with the times in terms of production, so it doesn't sound dated, but just write really good riffs, because you got these gifted voices. And they've become so iconic that you will sell a million copies in the first day, because that's the hardcore fans. And then metal fans alike will just look into it because of who you are and the name and the status involved. So I gave it a 9 out of 10. I actually think it's really strong, despite how many songs are on it. I actually think this album from top to bottom is strong, and everything that it has in it, the slower songs, it's perfectly placed album in terms of song structure and order. Standouts for me: Betrayal, Hearts of Darkness, Golgotha, and Rock the World Forever. I thought that was a nice little nod back to like late 70s, very early Priest. It was very straightforward, very easygoing, but it worked. But overall, this album's killer. Fucking fantastic.
Cool. Dave, you agree?
Oh, man. Yeah, absolutely. I am kicking myself that I have overlooked these albums for so long. And I don't even know the real reason for it. You knew he was doing these things, but it just, I guess Mick was right, just wasn't getting the press back in the day. You might get one little review in like classic rock or something, but there was other things happening. There was new music happening. So sadly, it got lost in the hundreds of other albums and whatever I was listening to at the time.
But can you imagine, sorry to cut you off, Dave, but can you imagine Chinese Democracy come out under Axl Rose?
Yeah.
That should happen. The hardcore fans would get it, but the people, it's the name, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, that already attracts people. When they see it under a different, it's not as appealing. I think that's what it is. So the work could be fantastic, but
the brand is different.
The brand is different, So, and it'll not be as strong as your previous. You can never catch up to the past. You can only.
For the band from the 70s and 80s, though, you know the band, you know who the drummer is, you know the bass player, the guitarist. So when one person breaks away from that with kind of nameless players, I think people kind of get put off that as well.
Yeah.
It's really sad, because this band's incredible. I mean, I love this album as well. Halford's only disappointed me once with his whole process, and that was really disappointing, because I got halfway through listening to his albums, and I'm like, Halford wins out of these two. I prefer Halford's solo stuff to Dickinson, and that really surprised me, because I prefer Maiden out of Priest. But this is a great follow-up to Resurrection. It continues what they were doing, but it's a bit more, it's slower at times, there's a bit more breathing space, it's darker, but it's still the band that released Resurrection, so it's taking it to the next level. Also, there's a few modern sounds, as Mick was saying. It's the production rather than the band doing what they do, but just making it sound like it's modern, which is awesome. In the Morning, that song, it's just that stamp that the album needed to just give it a little bit more diversity, and it really grabbed you. That was a fantastic song. It's placed really well in the album.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, really nicely. I gave it 10 out of 10. I love it.
Nice.
Stand out to Betrayal, Crystal, Fugitive, God, In the Morning, and Cubicle.
Cool. Well, right off the top, the tone is very different on this one. It's gritty, but it's got an almost industrial metal edge on things. It's not industrial, but it's got that edge applied to it. Halford is on, though, from the first note of this record. He's just fucking bang, and it's like, oh, hang on. This is what I've been really waiting for from the start. Some very cool studio tricks being used on this, between the panning, the effects, and that sort of stuff. This is the most sort of obviously studio-based album aside from the 2 one. But I like how it's used on this. It's not the cut and paste effect. It's the overall sonics and how it was done in that regard. It brings a lot of sort of a gloss to a dark record, which, you know, but it's kept the grit and the edge. So it all complements each other really nicely. Just listening to this is just a joy to hear. There were nice pace changes on this record. The slower stuff really lets Halford use his sort of mid to low range well. The punchy, you know, attacking stuff gets the high end going. The band are really writing complete songs. Every aspect is playing its part really well. It's clicked. This record is all just clicked. And I have to say that I really enjoyed the darker tone overall on this. It's very well. It's a well done cross between the Voyeur and Resurrection albums. Like it's. You get the best of both worlds in that regard. You get the modernised sort of production approach that fit the era that came from the Voyeurs, but with the songwriting and the attack that came from Resurrection, and you put those in a pot and you get this, and it's fantastic. On this one, where I think Roy sort of maybe missed a trick on the Chemical Wedding, where it would have been better with a bit more brightness to it, this one is bang on. This is exactly how this album should have sounded. He nailed this one. If you wanted to know what his production level was, this is the record to go to for mine. There are some nice subtle shifts in this as well, just in tones and the drive and the attitude. There's just subtlety employed across the line. It's a long album. There's, like we said, 16 songs, goes for an hour. This is not tiring at all. It flies by, this record, and you can listen to this over and over again quite comfortably. Simply put, if you like metal or Rob Halford at all, you need to get onto this record if you haven't already. This is simply fantastic, and I'm as guilty as anyone else. I've overlooked this one, and it's to my shame that I've done so. I gave this a 9.5 out of 10. I thought it was fantastic. I picked Sun, Rock the World Forever, and Heretic, but I've got a whole list of other songs that are just fantastic on this as well. So that was awesome. And I was actually surprised by that personally, because I thought coming into it that the Chemical Wedding, with how hyped that album is, against an album that I've really heard not a lot about, the result of that just went, okay, fuck, that blew me away, the result of that. And it's funny that the audience polling has shown this as well, because we've universally given this one to Crucible. The audience choice gave this to Chemical Wedding. So it's an interesting one in that regard. But now it's a fait accompli. We're playing Dead Robbers from here on out, because Halford has won the battle, like Dave said, at this point in time. So we've got 2 albums to go, 1 round left. So let's play the Dead Rubber. Let's get into it. We've got Bruce Dickinson with Tyranny of Souls, 10 tracks for 43 minutes. The 6th and most recent solo album from Bruce, released in May 2005 by Sanctuary, though it is very cool to hear that he might be working on a new one. Produced by Roy Z again. This is Bruce's first album after rejoining Iron Maiden, with Roy sending riffs to Bruce while Bruce was on tour with Maiden, which made this one a very interesting sort of back and forth kind of a thing to put together. Mick, over to you.
Yeah, I remember getting this album because the last couple were really strong, and I thought, shit, I didn't even know he was going to do another solo album while he had the Maiden commitment. Yeah. So I think this was to round out a contract at that point in time. So
it
had to
feels a little bit like that, yeah.
Definitely doesn't sound phoned in. No. If anything, they've pulled back the production and gone for a more natural approach. It just feels like put the mics in good spots, capture, because you guys can play. I don't know if it's the same band as the last couple. It does sound.
I don't think it is. Yeah.
Other than Adrian Smith, obviously, but whoever he got to play was just fantastic. They were just really, really good players, which you expect from a high caliber musician that ain't going to get any shit anyway. Mm-hmm. So my only criticism is it's too short. It kind of comes and goes a little too quickly, and I want more. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I still think it's a great album. I think it shows some elements of maturity from Bruce, that he's trying to navigate the seas of the sun. That was a real different song that he's never done with Maiden or his solo stuff prior. The metal stuff is an extension of Maiden because it doesn't sound quite like Maiden. It's probably a little bit harder edge, to be honest with you, in spots. But it's a perfect follow-on from Chemical Wedding.
Yeah.
You know, even though there's, 6 or 7 years difference between those albums at that point in time.
Yeah.
I think it was a real controlled focus to keep going with that, but also make it different after being back in Maiden for 4 or 5 years at that point, with a couple of another album. It would have been easy to write Maiden style. It doesn't sound like a Maiden album, again, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a metal album, which is, again, good.
Yep.
I don't know if I said it, but 8 out of 10. Solo Intruders, I think that's one of the hardest songs Bruce has ever done in terms of sound and how punchy that is.
Yeah.
River of No Return, I just love the breakdown in that middle. That's heavy as fuck. It's just and his voice, we keep banging on about it.
Yep.
But the dude fucking can sing.
Yep.
And he sings amazing. Again, Power of the Sun, I just think that would have been a cool Maiden song. To be honest with you. So powerful. And I think it ends, even though it's a short album and I'd like more, but Tyranny of Souls, the song, what a way to round out the album.
Yep.
And it leaves you with what's going to come next. And obviously we haven't had anything for a little while, but I did read recently that he's preparing to do, or he's already started working on, a solo album. So that should be interesting, because Steve Harris has done one recently with British Line. So maybe they're taking a little bit of a break while the whole world's dying of fucking COVID. So, yeah, who knows? When I a penis. It came off. It's detachable.
There's a song.
Yeah, we might get another album. So that'll be good.
Yeah.
I'd like that. Anyways, that was awkward. So.
No. Could have been worse. Could have been much, much worse. All right, Dave, where do you land on this one?
I've actually heard there might be a new Maiden album ready too.
Okay.
There was talk they were all in the same, I think Paris or something. They were spotted there. Kevin Shirley, all the partners were there as well. So there was something going on. This was about late last year. So they might have been geared up and then went to shit.
Maybe.
But out of all the albums in this process, I had to listen to this the most. And I had nothing to say about it. That's why I was listening to it over and over. And I realized that the first half is really good, and the second half always loses me.
Okay.
I don't know why. Because it starts off really strong with Abduction, which is fantastic. And Soul Intruders and Navigate the Seas of the Sun. They're my standouts on the album. But then it just loses me. I just start looking at the sky. And could be because I want to go back and listen to Halford, because they've impressed the hell out of me.
Yeah, it's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, I might have to go back to this album in the future. But this is a disappointment after Chemical Wedding, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, I mean, he can sing still. It's amazing. The first half, it's just, I don't know, the songs just aren't there for me in the second half. I get 7 out of 10.
Well, okay. Any standouts on that one? What were they again?
Yeah, Abduction, Soul Intruder, and Navigate the Seas of the Sun.
Cool. Well, I'm a bit like Dave in that this doesn't feel as strong as the previous record. I think he probably peaked between Accident of Birth and The Chemical Wedding, although I am very curious about what comes next. This is still a very good album, though, for mine. The energy, along with the drama on this, was great right from the start on this record. Production is a bit lighter. This thing breathes while still giving you plenty of punch about it. A little bits of layering of synth and stuff is done really well on this. It's all subtle, but it fills out the sound nicely. One thing they've done is that side of things. Like, I don't know if it's Roy or the artists, but the people they're working with collectively have really, fleshed things out and gotten the subtlety of, songwriting and album craft better as things have gone along. Good flow on this, good mixing up of the tempo to bring the genuine highs and lows into the listen. It's nice to get a serious ballad on this one, and that stood out to me in this process, how good a ballad can be on a record. Because a lot of this is really punching sort of stuff or got some intensity. You don't get a genuine ballad really until we get to this point of the listening for mine. Not a serious one that, just got the acoustic shit going on, and it's like, it was a really welcome thing to sort of come along. I liked the lyrics on this. I thought the storytelling was fantastic, and that was a return to form from previous releases of mine as well. You can tell he's back in Maiden at this point in time, but that actually makes this a nice counterpoint, because you can tell what he's putting into Maiden, and you can tell what he's putting aside for this, and this feels like a complete sort of thing of its own. So he's learned to differentiate those two worlds nicely with this. This is the least sort of band-like with, riffs being sent and ideas being sent back and forth while, Bruce is on tour. But it feels like the best mix of songs and production and that sort of stuff as a combined sort of cohesive listen. I don't think the songs are as strong as the previous two albums.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's as strong, and I don't think it was going to be because he wouldn't have put as much time into it. I think anytime you're not working in the same room, it does suffer, even though it can be still very good, So if he's touring and doing whatever else, there could be days before he gets back to that original idea and whatever. So, I think it's a testament to Roy Zed and what he does, and knew at this point in time what to do with him, and how to make it work. So, I just think that 2 or 3 extra songs would have rounded out this album really nicely. I
think that Roy is the unsung hero of this whole process. Come on, we all focus on the vocalist, but the fact that Roy got so intrinsically involved with both these guys and punched out some great shit, he needs a big, big nod. I thought this was really good. It just felt a little bit like a collection of songs versus a full-blown album, although it does make sense. And while it's all good, the downside for me on this record was I'm not sure how many of these songs just sort of stick with you after the fact. Now, that does suffer from listening to, Crucible right beforehand it. But I don't know how much of these songs on this record will stay with you, per se. It's just a little bit...
That's my problem. That's right.
Not quite as memorable. It's still very good, just not quite as good. But it's cool for me how I feel in the listening to this one. You can feel like this is a fun sort of project. He's not trying to do anything other than just do something for himself at this point in time, blow off some steam. And I don't mind that at all. It's done well. It's creative without, cross-pollinating too far, but not going too far away kind of thing. He's not trying to make a career for himself anymore because he's back in Iron Maiden, so the shackles are off. He's just sort of doing what he wants to do at this point in time, and it's all very good stuff still. I gave this one an 8 out of 10. I think it's very, very good, just not quite as good as the previous 2 records. Power of the Sun, Believable, and Navigate the Seas of the Sun, although when I was going through and I make little notes of what songs I actually really like, I've got little standout notes all over this record from beginning to end. So there are great songs all over the joint. This is really going to come down to taste, but I think it's a very, very solid record still. But now on to the final. The final album we'll go through today is Halford with Made of Metal. 14 tracks for 62 minutes, the 4th studio album from this band, released September 2010 by Metal God, produced again by Roy Zed. We skipped Winter Songs because we all know how that went last time around, and so went with this one instead, along with the Voyeurs album from 2. Dave?
By this point, anything released under the Halford name, you know what you're going to get, except for that Christmas album. We'll just ignore that. Yeah. The band is never short of ideas, and once again, they deliver a quality heavy metal album from start to finish. This is just great music to listen to. You could put on any Resurrection, Cubicle, or Made of Metal, and 16 songs apiece. And they're all roughly about an hour listen. So they're short, punchy songs that get the job done, get in, get out, and you just want to listen to them again. It's just quality. Got to mention special mention for Till the Day I Die. That's a very different song for Halford. Yeah. God, that works great. Very bluesy, but still got that heavy element. You know it's going to switch gears at any point.
Yep.
At the intro. I love that song straight. The first time I heard it. And there's one song on every album that's just, this is an instant classic, for me at least.
Yeah. Should do a poll at some point just of, if we were to pick one album out of all these songs, do you know what I mean? What would there be? That should be a challenge for everyone to go back and do a bit of work on.
There's a great live album he released with some Priest and some Fight and some Halford stuff. I think Resurrection Live it might be. It's a double
live Insurrection, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. Wow. It's got a great list. I haven't listened to it yet, but yeah, it's got a killer that list.
It's good. Yeah. It's good.
It's good.
Well worth a listen.
Nice. I gave this 9 out of 10. Standout. God, there's heaps of them. Undisputed, Made of Metal, Speed of Sound, Like No Tomorrow, Till the Day I Die, Heartless in 25 years.
Cool. All right. Mick, follow it up.
I can't. Because I'm going to go in a different direction. I find that majority of this album feels like leftovers from Crucible, and there's a reason why they're not on that album. I thought it hit a wall here, and it wasn't as strong. I think he was trying to recreate or keep going. This album for me just I got it and I was underwhelmed with it, and I quickly put it away, and I never really went back to it until recently. And I still feel the same way about it. I don't think it's necessarily bad because, again, these guys are seasoned veterans in what they do. So it's never going to be absolutely god-awful terrible unless they're trying to do a different style that you just simply don't like. But because they've set the bar so high on so many other albums that and it's when it's off, it feels like it's off in a big way. And I find this album just doesn't have what Crucible has. There is some good moments, and you expect that because you know they know what they're doing. They know what works for their audiences. They know how. Well, basically, they've got their niche market, and the niche market they know how to write to at this point in time.
Yeah.
So, again, it goes to what you said, Andrew, and it's taste or what you like more than something else. And I just don't think overall as an album this was as strong as the previous effort. It feels like it was leftovers. It doesn't feel like it was really worked on. It was almost it felt like these songs, I need to put out an album that I'm not really behind.
Yeah.
You know? I gave it a 6 out of 10. And that's probably my lowest score, I think, apart from that fucking 2 album. Which
that was your
lower.
You gave that a 5.
I just didn't think this is not, if this is his last solo effort, he's not going out with a bang, where Bruce still was producing some real quality stuff. Tyranny of Souls, I go easily over this any day of the week. Standouts for me were Fire and Ice, Heartless, and I really love the way this album ends. The Moa was such a different song. Such a modern metal song for Halford. But that was a great song. So there's moments where, you know, it works, but overall as a collective, it didn't really hit the mark for me.
Well, Dave, you're the outlier here because I'm with Mick. It's amusing to me. I really, for me, this one, we did, you know, sort of briefly mention we thought maybe the last album from Dickinson might have been a bit of a contractual obligation one. I don't really believe that. On this one, I do. On this one, it's stupid to say because it's on his own label, but this feels to me from start to finish like I've got a contract, I have to do it to get out of the contract. Here. That's what this one feels like to me. There's a long gap between, you know, Crucible and this, and Crucible is a fucking high bar. So you're gonna get a dip after that sort of record anyway, which you expect. But he's been back in Priest for a while, and I think that all shows. I think this one he's just not as into it, and I think you can tell from the first song. His vocals just aren't as strong. It's pretty weak lyrically. Like, this feels like it's being painted by the numbers. The lyrics were very repetitive. Nothing really interesting in there. Like, no meat on the bone. Just, okay, here's some words, to some riffs. Off we go. I think the production is solid. Halford's vocals are well caught. The whole mix is actually probably one of the most even across the board. Like, this is just a really nice, even mix. Clear, punchy, and warm. Like, you know, I actually liked the mix on this record. The performances are all solid, all this sort of stuff, but this is about the songs, and the songs aren't strong on this one. This does feel like what Mick was saying. There's a reason why these songs aren't on any other of his records, because these are just the ones that have just been sitting around waiting to be worked on, and they just don't get finished off because, I'll do this because I've got some time on my hands. It doesn't feel... I hate saying things like this, but it doesn't... This one feels like it's phoned in to me.
100%. I agree.
The vocals... It
doesn't have the energy. It doesn't have... There's something that it's just... like you said, it might have been not finished, and...
Maybe he was tired from all the work with Priest at the time. I don't know, because he was pretty busy with Priest around just before this was coming out. So, but I was listening to this and I could just envision Halford in the mic booth just putting out the vocal and going, okay, next. Like, it didn't feel like he was into it. Like, the first note on Crucible is fucking bang. And this one is just sort of like, you can just hear and just like, again, this is a really horrible thing to say, but it felt like he just didn't feel it. He didn't care or whatever else have you. No one never cares about what they're doing. That's a bad thing to say, but it just felt like that when you're listening to it. even the production, we dig into it, there's no tricks applied. There's not like all the tricks that Roy has done on the previous records. None of those are applied here. This really feels like one of those ones where everyone is just really going through the motions.
Is Roy on this album too, is he? Is it?
Yeah.
As well? Okay, well, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like his production.
Yeah.
And to me, it didn't anyway.
Yeah.
So.
It's a good mix, but none of those tricks and the other things, the accents that were going on in the previous records on all of them, this is the most vanilla mix, if that makes sense. There's the least going on, least points of division going on here. I don't know, this feels like, a classic end-of-year assignment that's just sort of been scraped over the line kind of a thing for me. That's what it feels like. It's a bunch of songs that are done well enough, but it's just that they're done well enough and they haven't appeared.
Yeah,
I don't know. I
find it hard pressed to remember songs of this album at all.
Well, the Mower, I remember the Mower because that's fucking brilliant. For the hardcore fans, this is going to really give you something. But if you're not that into Halford as an artist individually, this is not going to be the one that gets you. And I hope he does another solo effort to kick the memory of this one away, especially after Firepower. I would just like to hear him do one more solo record that just, ends that side of his, notes on a bang because, the Mower being the last track on the album and being the best track on the album is really just, that really threw me. You're hearing it, I'm going through the motions, listening to the record, like, said to Jody at the time, I was like, those albums you listen to where it's like, you just got to get through it. I think, and it wasn't that this one was bad. It was just that in comparison, it was like, this is not doing anything for me by comparison to previous works. And then that song came on. I'm like, where the fuck has that been the whole time?
Well, it's been there. It's been last.
Till the Day I Die was another one because that stood out, the sort of country kind of thing on that.
Yeah. This one felt like 16 songs.
Yeah, it did.
Or 14 songs or whatever the fuck it is. Like,
it's the first time I felt the duration.
By song 8, I was like, fuck me,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's one of those ones. I gave it a 5 out of 10. I picked the Mower, Till the Day I Die, and I Know We Stand a Chance. This is my lowest score on this one, which means that both Mick and myself gave this round to Tyranny of Souls, with Dave giving it to Made of Metal. And the flip side of that is that the audience also went with Tyranny of Souls. So it ends up in the final score of things being a 4-2 win to Halford. So overall, even though the last album was a bit sour for a couple of us here, even though I'm glad Dave enjoyed it. I must have missed something because it just didn't grab me. But it's interesting to note that was the way it worked out. But at the same time, while we've given the score to Halford in the end, the audience voting was a lot closer and gave it to Dickinson. That's an overall body of work. So we've gone against the audience vote. I still want to hear from people out there that are watching this. Give us your thoughts on how this process has gone and which one you give it to on the body of work we've talked about here today. And I think we will go back and the three of us should go away and try and come up with like the greatest hits.
That would be cool. That actually would be cool to do. Say, set it at, I don't know, 12 tracks for each.
Make it between 12
you tracks. You can't go any more than 12 and you pick your best whatever off each album. So, yeah.
Should we do one for each artist or a combined?
I think one for each. I think there's enough body of work there. Yeah. What is it, about 4 to 6 albums each?
Yeah, 6 each,
Something like that. One each. I think set the benchmark at 12 songs. You can't go over that.
All right, cool. The best 12 songs from each artist, and we'll put those together and we'll see how we go with that as a bit of homework for everyone to go back and get onto. We'll put those ones online after this one's released to the public to consume. I think... Do you guys know your overall individual, how you rated it in the end? Do you know who was your individual winner? Because for me, it was Halford. Halford won for me individually. What about you, Dave?
Dickinson won, but only because I binned Voyeur.
Okay, cool. What about you, Mick?
Yeah, I didn't actually tally them all up, but I would assume Halford would have won, but I always thought that Bruce was going to win. So once I actually went through and sort of tallied them up, I really don't know because my scores are really...
You've actually come out at a tie.
Okay, yeah. Well, there you go. 'Cause I'm looking at them now, and some albums are really high, and the other one isn't, and then vice versa for each artist.
I'm treating on the round method, so you've given 3 to each, and I'm assuming Dave had a balance there as well that's gone the other way, and I went with Halford as well, which again for me was surprising because I'm, like Dave said at the top, I'm much more of a, traditionally speaking, a Maiden fan. Like when we had the Maiden versus Priest battle, you and I were firmly in the Maiden camp in that episode, and I thought that this would be a romp in for Dickinson from Mark
as well.
And
happily
I actually,
surprised as it turned out.
Pardon?
Happily surprised as it turned out.
There's some great fucking records in here all around, but I was actually really pleasantly surprised at how the Halford catalogue gave me, wow, okay, I've missed some things here.
Much more appreciation from me.
So you got any final thoughts, Dave, that you want to share with everyone before we wrap up and get on out of here?
If you're guilty like me of overlooking these solo albums from both artists, seriously unfuck that, because you're missing out on some great music if you haven't given them the time. And it doesn't take away from the body of work from their main bands. They just branch out and you get to hear from different sides from them. What's that?
Actually adds to it, I think.
Yeah, it really does. And you get to hear more sides to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Mick?
Unlike Dave, I did follow these bands and these artists for the majority, so I was well versed on all of them, other than that Voyagers album. But what it's shown to me is that this is a dying breed of artist, because unfortunately, if anybody was to leave bands, how many bands, newer bands, let's say in the last 10 years or so, that could actually put out anything remotely strong, probably wouldn't happen.
I think Corey Taylor is the next big test.
What's that, sorry?
I think Corey Taylor is the next big test, his solo album coming out.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. But there's few and far between, and it always feels like when somebody's going to go, quote-unquote, solo, they have to do something miles away from what they've done. And I'm all for that, but generally it's not strong. Like if you remember Chris Cornell doing that Scream album, and when they go away really far from their wheelhouse, it's really not that good at all. So, I just don't think, when you look at any artists from newer bands and stuff, it ain't going to happen. So this is kind of a dying breed of, they've had all this abundance of music beforehand. They've either left or they've just taken a break. They're giving us something else in a different perspective that's maybe not as good, but it's subjective because it's 2 different bands, 2 different things, but still very, very, very good. So when we've both been saying that we could actually see that vocalist continue if they went on this path, then that just shows the testament of how good they are with or without a band.
Yeah.
A lot of bands or a lot of members these days are so reliant on the other that when they do step away, it's leaps and bounds away.
Yep.
Usually not as good. So this just shows you the quality of musician that they are, even if they are.
Shows how important chemistry is too.
There's that too, but it's also, if you're going to do that, you've got to get the right people involved. And these guys seem to know who to work with. Like that Roy Z guy seemed to be the best fit. Like we've touched on that quite a few times tonight. But that's also knowing yourself and then also getting people in that can understand where you've come from. Because obviously Roy Z knew the bands they were from, because when he came on board, he's kind of realigned them.
Yeah.
Because the biggest ego with musicians is, I've done that before and I don't want to do that anymore, and I'm this now, and generally this now isn't what got you to the dance to begin with, So, but it's a fantastic body of work. Yeah. So, and the good thing was they didn't do one album and join back to their, old band. It was 10 years worth. So. Yeah. It's fun. It's great. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
It's certainly cool. Like even at lowest scores, aside from one being in the whole thing, which I did expect when I heard that album, I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, that had Dave's bin all over it.
Yeah. Just knowing the people involved. But beyond that, even at the worst, they're still not terrible albums. It's just they've suffered against comparisons to other works in this process, which is, again, something to take into account because of just how good the rest of the stuff is. One of my thoughts coming out of this is I feel sorry for the bandmates that got left behind when they both went back to their original bands, because if you're going through Accident of Birth and The Chemical Wedding or Resurrection and Crucible, you're thinking, fuck, we're on. And then the rug's gone and the singer's gone back to his home and you're like, fuck, because you've just had two fantastic albums. I feel sorry for those guys in particular.
Yep.
When it comes to, the thoughts of what we're talking about just before about the solo artists that have done well, I think, Corey Taylor will be a good test coming up. But I think that Slash has done it pretty well breaking away from Guns N' Roses, even though it's a similar musical style. Working with Miles Kennedy has brought a different element to things, but also Miles and Mark Tremonti have also done some pretty cool albums in their own right as well. So there are a few, but none that I think will, but at the same time, we're talking about Slash and Miles and Mark Tremonti, and when it comes to how much people know those guys versus how much they know Bruce Dickinson or Rob Halford, there's a bit of a gap. Even for Slash, I would think, even though he's probably a household name, the other two I would say are not in today's standards, not compared to Bruce Dickinson and Rob Halford. So it's an interesting thing to see where that will go down.
But I think you have to compare when they left their respective bands. We're talking about close to 20 years in one band, then going to do it. Yeah. We're not talking about Guns N' Roses, 8 years at 3 albums thereabouts. If you want to get really technical, then it's 3 or 5. But I'm talking about longevity and then going and still being able to do some quality for a long period of time, which 10 years in any industry is a long period of time, especially in this one. And then going back and then giving another, 15, 20 years again, you're not going to get that from artists anymore. It ain't going to happen because they're rock gods. And rock gods don't exist anymore, unfortunately. No matter how good you are of a band, and to be honest with you, is it Matt Heafy from Trivium? I think if anybody can go solo, but he writes majority. He's like the Dave Mustaine of Trivium. He's another one, Dave. He could probably do something. Yeah. Again, but they're pretty much the sole songwriters of their bands. Yeah. These guys are the voices of bands, so they still have to find their way, and you can hear that through the years, especially with Bruce. He was hell bent on not doing anything remotely close to Maiden at the beginning. You can hear that. It ain't working for you, but so
you can see what they learned.
They do learn. Yeah. When the sales and everything and the money ain't coming in the same way, you fucking learn quick. I don't care who you are. There was a point
going through this one where Bruce was effectively broke.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah. Could you imagine coming from a stadium band for all those years, in the space of 5 years, you're fucking broke doing...
And he was being told what he could or couldn't do by the label. He was being told what he had to do by the label.
Well, there you go. So, unfortunately, we're not going to get artists doing this. So.
Yeah, I don't think so. Especially not when they've done it for so long with their home bands. And then in this context, you just went through the numbers. We've done 20 years, from 1990 to 2010, across this,
I guess there's one artist that I think if anyone was going to do it, and I thought it would have happened in the last handful of years at least because of his personal issues, that would have been James Hetfield to step away from Metallica and go...
Eventually.
But it hasn't happened yet. It may happen, but he's probably the artist where he seems to be really everything.
And he's the main
songwriter. It works for Metallica or it doesn't work for Metallica, so... but it remains to be seen what happens going forward, but...
Well, there's a hot topic in there as well about who we'd like to see do a solo project that hasn't done one yet. That'd be cool. Yeah. A discussion later on, maybe. And then who I think has done solo albums that also has been overlooked, because even though Mick was on top of these ones, Dave and I certainly weren't. And, who else has been...
It happens a lot. Like, that's why I wanted to do it, because,
Good choice.
Yeah, it's funny how a lot of people don't go, oh, I didn't realise, or I hadn't heard about it, or whatever, so... And,
I'm glad we did this one. I hope you are too, Dave, because, it's a lot of fun, and I got a bit of education out of this, and it was, very, very cool. So thanks for the idea Mick, and thanks to you both.
That's what I'm here for. So, I've got to educate you guys somehow. So.
Yeah, no, we do need it. All of us need bits and pieces here and there. All the help we can get, we get by with a little help from our friends. Apparently, that's the saying,
apparently it's a big song. That. I don't know. You've heard it. You might not have heard it, but
rings a bell. But yeah, no, thank you both for taking the time to do this one tonight.
It was good to go back through these albums. I haven't heard them. I don't go back and have time to listen to albums that I had brought years ago, A track might come on the iPod here and there, and it's like, I fucking love this album. I should go and dig it out. But from me saying that to me doing it doesn't happen. So when we do these things and you go back and have a listen, you go, fuck me, yes.
Yeah.
There's
a reason.
Really good times. So, and I'm glad it was enjoyable for the both of you. So, because otherwise this would have been, a couple of hours of pain.
Especially for you. No, I really am wrapped at this. There's some good albums in here that, I think that challenge of going back to find 12 songs from each is going to be a hard one for us to get through. So we'll have to get one of those with that one. That's going to be hard to cut down.
There's collectively 3 to 4 albums where we really rate higher. And there's probably, on average, 12 songs on those albums. So
there's a lot to cut down. It's we'll see how we go. We'll let us know, and let us know there too if you actually take the time to do the homework, listening or watching to this, and you want to go through and pick the best 12 songs from each artist. Let us know what they are as well in the comment section wherever you're watching this or listening to this. But I think we'll go there. Thank you again to do this, and thank you to everyone that's out there tuning in to us and our nonsense. As always, details are somewhere on the screen or in the description of this particular piece of content, so make sure you're following all of our socials. Again, it's the best way to get involved with things like the audience polling. Was a big part of tonight's episode, and we'll be doing more audience polling with all these monthly specials coming up too. It's also the way to keep up to date with everything else we're doing as well, including seeing silly little bits and pieces that don't quite make it into the final edit. If you want to give us some support, we greatly appreciate it. Please check out our Patreon page to do that. And also, while we're speaking of fantastic support, thank you again to our awesome sponsors in Squidding, Screen Printing, Bolt, Colt, and Rockstar Finance. Please do find them and just give them even a follow on social, just to show them a bit of love for the love they give to us here at the show. But that's it for now. We'll move on to regular programming next week. Our next special, seeing as it's Halloween month in October, we're going to be doing a very big comprehensive special finally on the band Halloween. We've never done that one before. We've done, I think, 2 albums ever of that band. So now it's time to go and do a bit of a deep dive on that band for a fitting Halloween for 2020. But that's it for now. Thank you all for paying attention to us for however long this has gone for. We'll see you again very, very soon. Until then, though, I'm Andrew.
I'm Mick.
I'm Dave.
As always,
drink up.
Rock on. But that was good. That was fun.
That was fun.
I enjoyed that.
No, I enjoyed listening to it. That was really cool. I really didn't know what to expect going into it because I'd only heard the Winter Songs album, which was, the less said about that, the better. Don't get me wrong, I'm one of the people that don't mind Christmas albums. I like the time of year, so it's always, it's fun for me. But that album's not a strong piece of work. And then I heard, 1 or 2 of the Dickinson stuff. But going through all this, I really think that picking 12 tracks is going to be fucking hard. I think that's going to be
because
really
you do
hard.
Lean heavily when you like something, you like it a lot, and generally a lot of tracks is the reason why you've rated that album so high. But you can only potentially put 2 to 3, maybe.
Because when I go through my reviews, I've actually got the track list typed out on my notes, and I just go and put a little star next to the ones that really grab my attention. That's how I sort of get my first baseline. Okay, if I like more than half of it, obviously it's a good album. That's
Yeah.
And then from there, I go and pick my actual absolute standouts. But, on most of these records, I've picked fucking a lot. So it's like,
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty good. So there's a fucking great body of work to get through and to have some fun with there. So no, it'll be a challenge to get that 12 down. A lot of fun.
I'm doing a lot of talking tonight. I feel like I'm the one doing all the talking tonight.
It's usually me that gets ripped on for doing most of the lengthy reviews and that, so I'm quite content to be here.
Yeah, well, I had to step it up because it was my idea, so I had to fucking go hard. So
Fuck, he's got Jamison and Shapes now. It's on.
And he's doing shots. Well, fuck. Someone's locked in for a big night.
Yeah, this could get messy.